Oh, okay. I wanted to discuss this with you further. So, when I asked you the question about Jaws,
Oh yeah.
about like any movie, I think what your point is, it being comparable to it was good. I'm just trying to figure out like because Jaws was like a worldwide phenomenon, whereas I think it wasn't that popular. The whole reason that I think was even mainstream is that it wasn't like initially popular when it came out as the movie, but they showed it on TV a lot.
Did they?
Yeah. And so that's where I remember first seeing it was on TV. So that's like, of course, that makes a whole, shit ton of people afraid of clowns. But I think that's more of just like a US thing. Whereas I think like Jaws, because of it being like considered a blockbuster and everything, I'm pretty sure it did go international.
Well, and there has to be a situation for a clown to be in. All there has to be for Jaws is just water.
That's what I'm saying.
Which,
So like from a psychological standpoint, I'm wondering if like, of course, it's nothing somebody's going to go and report that they have a fear of water because they went and saw this movie and everything. I'm just wondering if, like, across the board, like, places saw, like, reductions in, like, beachgoers and all that kind of stuff within, like, I'm assuming that movie damaged probably a lot of tourism.
yeah, like they weren't selling out, and it probably in like lake areas too. They're like, we're not selling all the cabins around the lake. Why? And they're like, Jaws. It's like it's a fucking lake. Why would there be a shark here? It doesn't matter. Like it's not a logical thing. One thing that I was surprised by too, and I think I heard this a couple weeks ago. Ben Schwartz, the actor, was doing an interview on KFC radio. Mm-hmm. He said that part of the reason why we don't see Jaws so much in the movie, like until the end, is because the animatronic shark broke.
Yeah, Bruce.
Like it broke like 2 weeks into filming.
Yeah.
So he had to like go through and renegotiate the script as far as like just not being able to show him.
There was a lot of issues. I think that's what also delayed like the production on it longer than it, had to be and everything, was that the thing kept fucking breaking down. So they would have it like on its barge that was like submerged like out of the water, and it's literally just like the first third of it that's supposed to look like the shark, and then the rest of it has like the dorsal fin, but then it's just like open like metal structure and shit.
So you just see like it comes out and the dorsal fin's just hanging.
It
off
looks
to the
about
right.
like you would expect taking like the tour ride at Universal Studios,
yeah.
the Jaws part.
Yeah.
That's like the technology they had to create that.
Yeah, it's super interesting to think about those. I guess it's called what, mass hysteria or some shit like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the phenomenon's called. Mm-hmm. But even just with us talking about it, because after I went on my dinosaur escapade with Jurassic Park, I was really trying to think about it, and I don't really know. I mean, there's nothing. Like, there's no movies that do that in the opposite direction. It's only, like, fear-based shit. Like, there's nothing that you see in a movie and you're just like, cool, all right. I'm generally just cool with whatever that is.
Like something that, like, lends, like, a hopeful optimism type. Yeah, that's not going to sell a lot of tickets.
It's not, but it's kind of a good way to do things. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know how to elaborate kind of, like, when they do good things, I guess, like that shitty motorcycle movie Wild Hogs with like Travolta and Tim Allen and all that. Excuse me. I think that painted like small bands of biker gangs in a good light, but then it's also like the bigger bands of biker gangs are worse. Like, I don't think bikers need like a bad boy movie to try to cement their image. I think bikers are just kind of bad people anyway.
Yeah, I think that just kind of...
Not all bikers are bad people, but anybody that's in a biker gang is usually probably not a good person.
Yeah, that's probably a fair assessment.
They don't get a lot of shit either, which bugs me. Have you ever seen like the news reports about the shootouts that they just have on like the Vegas freeway between like
yeah, or like inside casinos and shit? Yeah.
That shit happens quite frequently, but we usually just hear about black people gang warfare instead of like...
That's an occupational hazard of being in a biker gang, man. They don't feel like they need to report that. That just goes with the territory. Oh, you're in a biker gang, you've probably been in several shootouts.
Yeah, and it feels like every once in a while. There was one that happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago, like on the patio of a restaurant.
Yeah, it looked like a fucking like Jimmy Buffett's like
it was
what we call like
Margaritaville
Parabay
or some
Cafe
shit.
or some shit like that. Yeah.
And it just happens, and they're just cool with it. But bikers, I think, probably like when they see themselves on the silver screen in a bad light, they're probably like, "That's accurate."
Yeah.
It might be different, but other than that, there's no like movies that really instill fear. There's shit like Insidious and different things, but none of that's logical. Like sharks logical, clowns
Clowns are
somewhat
illogical.
logical.
Well, thanks to what were you saying, John Wayne Gacy?
Yeah, John Wayne Gacy made it logical.
lended some actual like credibility to clowns being psychopaths or something like that.
And to KFC, because he also managed KFCs. So a
That's
clown
true.
that manages KFC, both scary or scary prospects.
Speaking of KFC, I think I can move this into this. Do you know who I believe would have loved KFC had he spent more time in the States?
You don't think? When do you think KFC was made?
Ooh, in like a chain form?
Yeah. Because it definitely wasn't over in London by 1965,
No.
but I'd like to think that Winston made a stop and met the Colonel. I think the Colonel and Winston would get along pretty well.
Winston was in America for a little while.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if in one form or another he had, something similar to KFC.
Yeah, or even fried chicken. He's
Yeah.
like, you guys got fish and chips. They're like, motherfucker, we got something even better.
You guys fry fish, we just decide to fry chickens.
Yeah. You cut it up. Sometimes. Sometimes not. Sometimes we just throw the whole bitch in there.
So we're talking Winston goddamn Churchill, or what was his legal name? It was Winston...
It was like Rupert or something. He had a Raymond something. He had a real bad middle name.
Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill.
Spencer, I think, was the one that I heard. Don't like it.
I love this guy. This guy, preface this with, this guy is human, so he's going to have some faults, but overall, probably one of the most, crucial people within the last couple centuries to have existed, not only politically and everything like that, but just overall.
I don't know really how many people think about this word when it comes to like trying to describe a human. Winston Churchill is just undeniable. Like the man, it doesn't
Sounds like
matter.
a fucking L'Oreal commercial. Be undeniable.
He
Be
could have been.
Churchill.
He didn't have any hair, so L'Oreal wouldn't have done any good for him.
Or a makeup commercial.
No, yeah, but is it makeup? Yeah, probably.
It might be, I don't know.
But he just, it didn't matter how many times he fucked up. He was like the ultimate, he was the epitome of get knocked down 4 times, get up 5, or whatever that saying is. Like he never stopped doing what he wanted to do until he finally achieved what he did. He learned from his mistakes, for the most part. He ran into some failures, but every time it was a failure, it was like he just escaped and did something else.
In a weird way, like I think when he would go do something after he had been failed or lost whatever position he was in, it may have seemed like he was running from it, but in a weird way, he went to gain experience that he lacked and kind of was the reason. Like we'll get into that kind of stuff, like specific examples, as weird as that sounds. So Winston Churchill was born November 30th, 1874 in Oxfordshire, Blenheim in Oxfordshire, and then the place where his family estate was is it Blenheim? Blenheim Palace.
So already starting off, he's born into an estate and a palace. That sounds like a pretty swanky birth.
Well, his parentage was, his father was English and was a direct descendant of the first Duke of Marlborough on his dad's side, and then his mother was actually American.
So
there was
his
apparently,
or his grandpa was the Duke of Sigs.
yes,
Duke Marlboroughs.
spelled differently, I think.
His Marlboro man.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it comes from that, and they just got rid of the UGH. I don't know.
We tend to do that with stuff.
But yeah, so apparently there's this big kind of like craze in like the but like sometime in like 1850s.
Late 19th century.
Something like that, where it was like really fashionable for members of like the British royal family, but like the outliers, like the Duke and different places, to like marry their sons to wealthy American businessmen's daughters. Like it was something. It was like a trend or something, and so that's kind of where Randolph, his dad, and then his mom Jenny Jerome had been arranged.
It's a good move. I mean, if you're trying to court business from an up and coming country and try to bring that money back into your country, it only makes sense to form business practices through marriage. That way.
And it's the same thing as like how do you establish like a monarchy and everything or leadership? You would intermarry essentially like the royal lineages. From a business standpoint, it doesn't seem any different. Like, oh, you're a steel magnate. I'm a businessman in this. Why don't we go ahead and like? It reminds me off of Wedding Crashers. It was like the lodges and the what's their last name? It's Sack Lodge and the Clearys and the Lodges.
Yeah.
Two great American families.
And as I think we talked about last week, that's where we get into the weird interbreeding, which this wasn't really an issue because we're talking about completely different countries here. There's no way that Jenny Jerome and Lord Randolph's other family members are going to start fucking. Like, this isn't a royal to royal switch.
Yes.
This is like a royal to commoner to create kind of a...
This is Harry bringing in Meghan Markle, the American. Like, he was doing it back. So Churchill's got some street cred on that.
The alliteration to that, Jenny Jerome and Meghan Markle, don't like it. Feels weird.
You were even mentioning this, like when you heard him talk, it wasn't like a thick British accent.
I think I figured that out.
Okay.
And I think there was a time when they used a certain microphone to where you almost had... Because a lot of the times when you hear like old-timey voices... It's always the projection and the talking like this and the really quick, like, it's almost like everybody
They talk
has
like this.
Yeah.
Here's the news update.
They have like the same accent as far as like across the board or the same speaking cadence. And I think that had something to do with the microphones. Like that was the clearest way that they would be picked up.
Maybe that was
like
how
that.
they actually, like if you took like classes on speeches and stuff like that, that it was something like a universal way that they're like, this is how people talk when they're being an orator. Or something like that. Like they talk in this cadence and you have to learn to talk like this. It's the most appealing way to have people hear you and they're more likely to agree with you. There had to be something to that.
Well, it's almost like an accent among itself.
Because you couldn't come in there with like a Cockney accent, but like, oh, you lot. Be like, shut the fuck up and listen here. This guy named Hitler, he's up to no good. You couldn't like fucking talk like that and have anyone want to side with you.
Very true. You wanted to be a good orator. And I don't really know how to describe like his childhood because his childhood's the saddest shit ever. And I think unfortunately he kind of pushed that onto his own kids because from a very young age his dad just didn't really care to have him around. Like it was almost like his kids were more of a matter of convenience. And I didn't really get into like how many brothers and sisters he had. But I gotta wonder if it was just Winston himself or if it was just the children as a whole were all treated that way.
I think it probably would have been children as a whole were treated that way. He was the head, like the oldest boy. So he was going to be the head of the household essentially after their dad left. But yeah, he didn't have a good relationship. I think he wishes he wouldn't have ended up doing that. It's ironic because then he had that same kind of relationship with like one of his sons.
That same.
Yeah. He was, how did they term it? He was like a servant to the country first and foremost and like a husband and a father like second or some shit like that.
Well, and if you have an arranged marriage with Jenny, there's a chance that's going to be...
I'm in Winston.
Yeah, but as far as like... Because he even had a tough relationship with his mother, too.
Yeah.
And it seems like they might have done a little bit better later on because she ends up sending
after
him
her father was gone,
a lot of the books and shit like that he wanted. But... I have to assume that that's sort of a loveless marriage, whereas Winston, on the other hand, him and Clementine were like peas and carrots. Like, he really loved that lady and took a lot of... For the fact that he didn't take a lot of advice from anybody, and yes, most of the stuff that Clemmy was giving him wasn't political, but he really, like, she had his ear. They were a true kind of a team in doing...
Oh, yeah, there's something to be said about, like Eleanor Roosevelt to... FDR and everything. I think that
he was the top, she was the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
She was the legs of the presidency. Did you hear about Winston and Teddy meeting?
The initial meeting didn't go well, right?
No.
No. Okay, well, that was Teddy though. That wasn't FDR.
No, it wasn't. But when they met, we know Teddy is like the Rough Rider, the guy that goes out there and shoots bears
in the
and
Amazon
shit like
and all that kind of shit. Yeah.
They said that when Winston and Teddy met each other for the first time, they really didn't get along well, and it wasn't like a shock. Because the aides to Teddy and the aides to Winston were like, they're just the same person.
That's what I was going to say. That's what it ended up being, is they were too much alike.
Yeah, they were
along.
too, like,
there was no take and give and take between their personalities. It was, too similar.
And you have to imagine when Teddy's like, I shot a bear, he's like, yeah, well, I shot 15 men in battle. Like, just back and forth, they just were trying to one-up each other the whole entire time. Which I'm sure they had a mutual respect, because I know that Churchill had a pretty good relationship with FDR, it seemed like. Dumb question. FDR and Teddy were related, right? Brothers?
Not brothers.
Cousins?
We'll find this out now.
That should be an American question that I should know, I feel like, but...
Roosevelt and FDR.
Growing up, though, he really... Like, he wasn't the smartest... He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. He didn't always enjoy school.
Two distantly related branches of the family.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Theodore Roosevelt and his fifth cousin. So not even really close.
Damn, that's nuts. But he didn't get along well in school. He was a troublemaker growing up. Didn't really take to the academic side of it. He went to a place called Harrow School, which was like almost like a prerequisite, like a military sort of, like, before college. It was like a preparatory school.
Yeah,
almost.
You could take. He said something like he went to the Harrow School. It feels like it always took him multiple tries to get into these schools, and then he finally got in, like, on the third try. When I'm guessing, like, at some point Randolph was like, he's getting fucking in. Like, do you guys need, like, a new building or, like, a new wing or something like that? He's getting in.
He had the money to facilitate it, and he really... Like, him going to Harrow was kind of at his father's request. Like, it was sort of, I think he went there more to try to please his dad.
Yeah, do you imagine these schools as, like, the fully uniformed schools and, like, the preparatory schools? Like, that's what I'm seeing, like, in the old... Okay, so...
Almost like a Catholic-style school where it's a regimented schedule, everybody wears the same shit,
and they live
in
there.
dorms.
And they live there at the school, I would imagine.
Yeah, they live in dormitories.
But his last 3 years of the Harrow School... His father wanted it to be military-centric, or I guess they had more of a military curriculum that he could do, so he did that. And then after that, he went to the Royal Military Academy, which was called like Sandhurst.
Yeah.
And did that on his third try. And he was accepted as like a cadet in the cavalry. At a time when the cavalry was literally cavalry, like the guys charging in with the swords on horses and shit.
Well, and it seems like Harrow and Sandhurst kind of fit his mold better because he was, like I say, not terribly smart, which is really surprising to know that he was this bad in school because later on, he becomes like a literary
I don't know if
icon.
it's necessarily that he was smart. It's one of those things where maybe, you look at what curriculum they were trying to force him to do, and maybe he was just bored with it, or that part didn't interest him in the other stuff, and that's what they deemed him to be unintelligent in regards to that.
Could be.
I think part of it is just kind of being, especially with his family upbringing, probably being like rebellious and stuff like that and getting into trouble. There was something about like him being basically raised by their nanny. Her name was Elizabeth Everest, and he said something to the effect of like, she was my dearest and most intimate friend for like over 20 years or something like that. After she had died. So I don't know if it was him just having like a rebellious streak, so he was getting into trouble. And at that point too, if you're rebellious and you're getting into trouble, they probably deem you as less intellectually gifted than the people who aren't like making waves.
It could be. I mean, he still had to take these tests multiple times to get into these schools, so it may...
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is it depends on what they were requiring as intelligence versus what...
And I think everybody kind of runs that course now. I fucking hated math.
Yeah.
When I made it to college, I only took one college course of math because it was just terrible. But I loved history. I loved anthropology. And I'm sure as far as like his military career, and not only his military career, but his journalism career in military situations. Sandhurst and Harrow had to have been just right up his alley. Like that was his deal. And we find out later on in life, which we'll get to eventually, he's an avid reader. Like the dude just eats books for dinner, which I think is really kind of a different kind of intelligence that he may not have had to flex to get into these schools.
That's the thing. He could have been just bored. And I'm not saying bored in the sense of like the subjects and topics bored him. He could have just been lazy at that point in his life and unmotivated.
Wasn't challenged, so he didn't really try to push into challenging himself.
Well, he ends up graduating, and then like a month later, after Winston graduates in like January 1895, Randolph dies. So he becomes the head of the household at that point. And I think he has one younger brother.
Is that what it is?
I think so.
But he started his military service in 1893, so he was 2 years into the military before his dad passed. So he did kind of make it sort of to where I think his dad had wanted, and that was sort of their relationship, and I think sort of what shaped Winston the whole entire time was that desire to just always do things that his dad would be proud of. There's later on in life, I want to say it was kind of towards the end of his life, maybe not because of he like wrote articles about it and all that type of shit, but he actually had a talk with his ghost father. And it was like a conversation where his dad, I'm sure he was drunk when this happened, but
there's a high likelihood of that.
Yeah, his ghost dad showed up, and he didn't even mention like the prime minister parts of his career or anything like that. It was so tightly based around his military service and what he saw, and just him trying to gain that acceptance from his dad even after his dad had passed.
So what you're saying, because that's his manifestation of his dad, that because that's what was important to his manifestation of his dad, that in turn is what he thought was important to his dad.
Yeah, and I think that that's really just kind of what drove him to do a lot of it. I'm sure a lot of what drove him was the fact that everybody told him that he was crazy or that he was wrong or that his beliefs kind of wandered. And we'll talk about his political career, but the guy never really changed his true north. Everybody else around him changed their policies.
I've kind of found that when I was looking that I couldn't decide whether it was he just had more of a centrist view of a lot of things and was willing to actually hear out people from other and differing opinions, and he wasn't afraid of changing his, or if, like you're saying, he was just truly in the middle, and there were a lot of players like coming across, or like, what do they call it, crossing the
aisle.
Was it crossing the aisle is the term or something like that, crossing the line?
Oh yeah, he went just before we really get into his political career.
Well, I have a bunch of stuff on his essential like army service, even before he gets into politics.
And we'll get to it, but just to kind of explain the point, he was a conservative from 1900 to 1904. Then the party sort of shifted away from what the actual beliefs were, and part of it was they went to more of like a not really an isolationism, but they didn't try to trade a lot, and there weren't a lot of trade deals going anywhere.
Yeah, the British political system is very confusing to me. And I know saying that as an American, it's probably that's probably weird to say, but like their political system seems to be much more fluid in the fact that opinions can change. Kind of like how when we talked about the Civil War, how technically it was the Republicans that were more like Democrats today versus Democrats versus Republicans today. I feel like British government and parliament and everything is a much like faster acting version of that. Like the conservatives can be like for this and everything like this in this 10-year span, but then they can almost kind of change their ideology. And then you have like the Tory Democrats who are part of the conservatives, and then you have
this was even prior to the Labour Party. And when we're talking conservative, liberal, and Labour Party, liberal is almost more of the centrist between the two of them. Like it's almost like the center bridge to where they can come and meet. And because they do have these different political systems within the parliament, you will see them team up as far as like liberals and conservatives. They might not win the majority vote, but they'll still have enough seats together to where they can combine and kind of become the majority party. Yeah. There's a lot of sharing back and forth.
So kind of going along with his flexibility for his ideas and everything like that. Some people saw it as a negative. They saw it as him being like wishy-washy and jumping ship and everything like that. Basically how he described himself, he was an ideologically an economic liberal and imperialist. He was definitely an imperialist.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's for him not to, people that were not imperialists at this time, that was the outliers. For the most part, everybody was an imperialist at that time. So that's something that when you talk about it kind of in hindsight, it is a negative thing against him. But at the time, it wasn't outside the norm. He was just kind of the majority.
Well, it's a turn of phrase that I don't really enjoy because I don't feel like it gives people cover.
Yeah.
But the phrase, it was a different time back then. Like, you can use it in certain situations, and at this point in history, we have French territories that have been taken over by France. We have Spanish territories that have been taken over by Spain. We have British territories that have taken over India, Australia, obviously. The real big areas, that's why you hear, like, the Dutch West Indies and shit like that.
That's why what was it, Beijing, that was British controlled up until, like, yeah, that's the craziest thing is when, if you're old enough to have heard of this stuff, where you do have places like French Polynesia, and you have the Dutch East Indies, and then, you have places down in like Singapore that were British rule, or India, when India was under British. This is at a time when India was under like full-blown British rule.
Yeah, what I think is the most populated country in the world was technically British ruled and owned, and it was just kind of how it was.
That was the thing too, is Churchill did believe, this is kind of another knock kind of against Churchill and everything. Like you're saying, I think when you use the term, it was a different time back then. You can't use that as an argument to say what your opinion, why you have a similar opinion now. The argument doesn't work like that.
Yep.
I'm just saying it to kind of provide like context of how it was. But one thing that kind of hurt Churchill kind of later in his career, not even later in his career, actually a little bit early on in his career, was politically he believed that India wasn't prepared to govern itself, or didn't have the capability of governing itself. So he felt that they owed it, or they had a duty to go ahead and oversee and rule the Indian people, because he felt that, was it as a race, they weren't able to govern themselves?
Yeah. And that's, again, these are knocks for the time. We're not saying that Churchill was a bad guy. This is the same debate that we have with Washington and Jefferson and everything like that. As a whole, they did a lot of great
people
things.
Are people.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is people
everybody's fallible.
Everyone's fallible.
And
he had these, and I'm not saying these to to try to make excuses. What I'm saying is this is kind of the complexity of Winston Churchill. So he didn't believe that the Indian people could essentially rule themselves, but he wasn't against. It wasn't in. I'm trying to think of how to say this, because he also argued and tried to like fight for the like inhumane treatment of other like soldiers that were fighting with the British, that he deemed in areas not to be able to govern themselves. So it was weird. He was like, he would fight in a certain way for the people, but then in another way he would kind of fight against those people.
The easiest way that I think I can explain it is when he was a schoolboy and when he was learning and everything like that, Charles Darwin was still alive. Charles Darwin had still made his journeys around the world, and there was sort of a scientific belief at the time, just vis-a-vis, because Darwin was going around to these different countries and meeting all these people, that there was like not a racial superiority, but like there were just people that were less.
I think it was a cultural superiority is what it was.
Probably.
He felt that because of their culture. So it's not really splitting hairs, race or culture or anything like that, but his wasn't an intellectual capability idea. He just felt their culture hadn't reached a certain advancement to where they were able to govern themselves effectively. And because the British were more advanced by his standard, that they should step in and do that.
Yeah, which I've heard arguments both ways, and I don't really get the argument of like, well, look how much better off they are now because we intervened, because everybody's on their own evolutionary scale. Is it great that they stopped, some of the things that were going on, cannibalism and stuff like that? Yeah, that's awesome. But at the same time, there's that kind of guiding hand to where they were helping these people, that they were, it wasn't really like slavery. They were just ruling over these countries. They were also reaping the benefits.
Subjugating.
The natural resources
they were under their
were
rule
coming back there.
and their laws.
So they were getting money from them. They were getting goods and different things like that, which in turn just really helped England. But we
It was
also
obviously
see,
wrong because even Churchill was alive when they started. What does he say? The disbandment of the empire. He was sad to see, and that's what they'd considered itself. When you really think about it, it's weird to like be like, oh yeah, like there were empires just until within the last 100 years. Like the British had an empire because it was Great Britain, this little island, but then it was also like India, and then a section of China, and like islands like in the Caribbean, and then think about like Australia and New Zealand, like those were founded as British colonies and everything. So they had an empire that until the end of World War II was very much intact and then kind of got parsed up.
and it's still, I think to this day, there's places in Africa that are heavily influenced by England. And
Oh, yeah.
as far as India goes, we've had this talk a couple times about the national dish of England is curry.
Yeah.
Like there's no question as to how curry is the most or the most favorite food in England. But we also see with Churchill, which I think kind of explains more to the point, was he was very friendly with Jewish people. He believed that Jewish people shouldn't be getting the shit that they're getting from kind of everywhere. Because when we talk about history back then, it wasn't just the Germans that were shitting on the Jews. Like there were a lot of different countries that were taking shots at them as far as not only immigration, but like where they needed to be in the hierarchy of the world.
Yeah, where their control lied as far as finances and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
But he didn't see it that way. He was, for lack of a better term, I think they've called him a Zionist. There's another word that's different than, I don't even know what it was. But it's not like an anti-Semite. It's like a pro-Semite.
I think it was like pro-Semite, something like that.
But he really saw the distinction of people that were being treated poorly that he didn't want to be seen. And like you were saying before, when they would capture enemies that they were fighting on front lines, he didn't want them to be tortured. He didn't want them to be treated improperly.
Yeah. Well, not only that, it extended to he saw how, because again, this was at a time like because of colonialism when the British Expeditionary Force, which is their version of their army, that's what they call their army, the Expeditionary Force, was made up of these huge segments of Indian soldiers, and by soldiers from like some African areas and everything. And so you would have these soldiers within your army, but they would essentially be different segments of soldiers. So he saw these other segments of soldiers of places that they had colonial power over being like mistreated. So he would speak out against that as well. I mean, his first, as far as like his military service and everything, I don't know, you hear people like talk about like, I want to see the world and everything. Like he wanted to get into it after school. He wanted to get into it as quickly as he could. And this is going to kind of tie into how he builds a relationship with different American politicians, but he actually in like a little after 1895, he wanted to see action, so he went to Cuba to observe the War of Independence there.
Yeah.
And that ended up being, over the years, didn't that switch rule from Cuba to like American backed away from like French backed or something like that?
I think it was Spanish backed.
Spanish backed, that's right.
Yeah, because he went in there and his first action that he ever saw was he was trying to suppress the freedom fighters by helping the Spanish troops in Cuba.
Yeah.
So
fighting against the Americans, technically, or an American-backed forces.
Yeah, in a way. But when I say that he was crazy, he wanted to be where the action was pretty much all the time. Like, he just went over to Cuba as an observer.
Yeah.
He was like, fuck it, I'm going to get my hands dirty. I'm going to get in there and make things happen. There's certain things that he's done over time while he was at war, and I'm sure he'll get to it.
He's being legitimately posted by the military to these areas. He just has some influence in which, like, he's able to use a little bit of this influence to get him posted to these specific places that he wants to go.
Which I'm sure, being the son of Lord Randolph, was probably helpful.
That's what it is. Like if you just kind of like look at it at a glance, you're like, so he just took off to these places. Like, no, he was able to influence himself under being a British officer or whatever to go to these places.
But to the opposite, he was trying to go to these places to get engaged.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't just going to watch or like have fun or anything like that. It wasn't vacation. It was like, I'm going to make some shit happen.
Yeah.
And he was really driven by like his desire to get medals. And there was one point, I think it was during World War I, where everybody was laying down. I don't know if it was in the trenches or whatever, but he was just like, fuck it, I got to earn a medal somehow, and just stands up. Like, stands up and basically gives himself up as they're shooting and firing at, or as they're being shot at. Like, he wanted to be in the action to the point where he just stands up and doesn't get hit by bullets, but ends up surviving, and he does get a Medal of Honor for that. But
Not just standing up for doing something, right?
I think he just stood up and started firing back.
Oh,
he was
okay.
the only guy that stood up and just started firing back.
I'm going to have to look into this.
Yeah, I forgot when it was.
One of the things, too, is this is kind of when he started to almost act as like a war correspondent and really started like writing as far as like I don't know what you would consider this type of writing. He would essentially write down his experiences and like the information, just like a war correspondent does, and he would be sending it back to England to have it like printed in a certain paper.
Yeah, he just crazy enough. After he got done with Cuba in 1896, he was down in India, and
he visited New York first.
Yeah.
So on his way, kind of from Cuba, he went to the United States and kind of traveled to a couple different places, and then went to New York because I think that's where his mom was from, and overall had like a relatively like positive experience of like the American like people and culture.
Yeah, I think he liked us. I think that America was kind of maybe a hope and a dream for him. And at that point, we really, as far as England and America, there's still, I think, a little bit of commingling. I think there was still...
Oh, 100%. At this point, I'm pretty sure this was like a time of like trade and everything like that.
Or we're 100 years after the Revolutionary War.
I think a big thing too about Churchill is I think the reason that he goes like so balls in on a lot of this stuff is he's one of those people that he doesn't wait till he reaches the end of something before making the plan for the next thing. I think he had like a career plan to where he's like, I'm going to serve in the military for this much time. I need to accumulate this many accolades in order to make it to Parliament by this age. And I think the reason he kind of had that stuff in mind and everything is he knew he had to have wanting to get where he wanted to be in like Parliament or whatever that system. I think he knew he had to have certain experiences within those fields. So that's why he went to also serve in the army, and it would actually lend like, he comes in with his medals and everything like that.
It helped him that way, but I think it also helped him just learn more about what he was doing.
Exactly, the world.
Yeah,
that's why he was trying to take things that were away from England. You find that like he was based. I think you were just about to talk when he was based in India.
Yeah, and that's when his mom started sending him books. When he was requesting books from all these different authors.
19 months, and that doesn't sound like a lot of time. 19 months.
No, it doesn't. But back then, when you're in a war, there's not really a whole lot going on. And he wasn't active, I don't think, in India. I'm not really sure what was going on, but he had a lot of time on his hands to where he would start to read. And I think that sort of starts to shape the journalist in him and sort of begins that career. Because after that, he started his career in politics in 1899. He ran for Parliament in Oldham, Lancashire, which I think Oldham is a soccer team.
Did you get to his capture and escape?
No, that's coming up.
Okay. There was one thing even before that.
Before his capture?
Or even before he, when you were talking about him self-educating himself, I had something on that. Just kind of the stuff that he started educating himself with, he would have his mom send him like Plato, Edward Gibbon, Charles Darwin that you just talked about and everything. This is also when he started really learning politics, because she would have her send him the paper that basically, apparently there was an entire newspaper dedicated to all of like the political goings on in Great Britain. So he would be in India during this time, basically catching up on everything and keeping up on everything and learning about the different parties and all that kind of stuff. That's what I mean. I feel like he was very like focused on. He knew exactly what the next step was going to be and was preparing for it at all times.
Well, and just to kind of point out how far that took him, he held 20 different political offices in his career.
Yeah.
Like that's just a million between parliamentary seats. He was the ambassador to the colonies as far as everywhere that they ruled over. Like he was really a man of the people and out there. And that includes 2 times as prime minister, which seems I don't know how it works over there, but he had a little time off in between his first and second term. But he really knew, like you're talking about at that age, at a fairly young age, because we're talking 1899. He was born in 1874. So what? That's 25 years old. Mm-hmm. That he's really starting to shape his political aspirations and kind of his career aspirations.
Well, one thing too, like you were talking about trying to cram as much, experience as far as like wartime stuff. 1897, he volunteered to join a campaign against, they were called the Momin Rebels, and he was accepted to go as like a war journalist. And it was during that time, during that campaign, that he wrote actually his first book and an additional book, which happened to be his only like attempt at fiction. So he
actually he tried fiction out?
He wrote a fiction book. Apparently it wasn't that successful. It was his only try at it.
Well, yeah, he's lived so many real life experiences that fiction doesn't really seem like it's right up
but
his
like
alley.
1897, at this point, like you're saying, he's even younger. He is 22 at this point, and he wrote his first book. I'm not saying it was like a smash hit, but it was popular, and it was like well received. So he already has enough life experience to write a fucking book at this point.
Yeah.
Like 22 years old.
And that's prior to his political aspirations in his career. So back up to 1899, he runs for Parliament in Lancashire, ends up not winning it. So after he ends up not winning, he sails to South Africa because he was going to cover the Second Boer War as a war journalist for a paper called the Morning Post. And as they're getting down there, or I don't know if it was as they were getting down there, they were traveling, there was a train derailment, and they were taken in by the enemy as POWs. Mm-hmm. And just to think about this and to think about now, like he was just a prisoner of war.
Yeah.
Like he went to a prison camp and was there for a couple months and then just had the balls on him to say, fuck this, I'm out, and escaped.
Yeah.
Like how you're a prisoner in a foreign war that you have no idea about. You're just going to try to escape within the first couple months.
Which he ends up doing. It's like through a combination of escape, hiding in like freight cars, and then at one point he hid in a mine or something. But then he made it like north to like Spain or Portuguese occupied. Yeah, but everyone had their hand in Africa at this point. Keep in mind. So it was either Portuguese or Spanish occupied Africa. And then because they weren't in an adversarial position with England, they arranged for him transport. And then he got transport south back down to South Africa and like joined back up and like linked back up with where he was supposed to be.
He wasn't even fighting in this war when he became a POW. He was just covering it as a journalist.
Yeah.
And throughout his career, at one point, he was like the highest paid war journalist around. Mm-hmm. He had that much cachet about him that people just wanted him, so they were willing to pay whatever they could because they knew that he would actually get into the shit. Like, he wasn't just going down there and trying to cover the war from a distance. He's like, let me get on the front lines, let me check some stuff out, let me see what's going on. I'm going to write you the most accurate piece of what's going on here. The thought of being a POW in your early 20s and not actually being like actively involved in the war blows my mind.
The way they talk about it was so casual.
Yeah.
Like, his train got derailed by some shelling, and then he was taken prisoner of war. But don't worry, he escaped.
Flipped his eyelids inside out so he could gather water, so he was able to survive in the POW camp. Like,
just so fucking casual.
Casual, yeah. And after that, at 25, he finally secures his first political victory, which was a seat in the House of Commons. And I think that is
House of Commons what you consider Parliament?
I think it's a part of it. I think it's like how we have like the House of Representatives and the Senate. I think House of Commons is a part of it.
Okay, what is the room that they all sit on opposite sides of each other? In the middle is that weird desk with the three judges, and they put when they're going to give a speech, they put stuff on these old wooden chests.
In England?
Yeah.
It's got to be the House of Commons. I don't know. A chamber or something like that?
Well, yeah. I just know because I saw it on a few like documentaries, and it always like even like I don't know if like the little chests are still there today. It's like a ceremonial thing. Is what I think it was.
For as weird as we get them.
Yes, it's the House. You're right. It's the House of Commons.
Okay. with the tradition and the weird shit that we do in our politics, I forget that there's other countries that have been around for
Yeah.
hundreds of years longer.
So look at this. Okay, they all sit on separate sides like that. There's three guys right there. They're
Yeah.
like the three judges. And then there's these two wooden chests right here. And when they're getting up to speak, they set their papers or their speeches on the wooden. And that's like the speaker's position is standing up at that. And they each have one on each side.
And the
But
people
like I'm
that-
saying, it like I look at that like it's ridiculous. But then you look at our system for it, that it's all in the round and everyone just yells at each other.
Yeah, and ours is like the most modern equivalent of that.
Yeah.
Like that's the most normal thing that other countries that have had thousands of years of history and have kind of adapted their government from that, they're going to do some pretty goofy shit too. But he was, I think, in that position, he was 25 when that happened. So 25 years old would have been, 1901-ish, somewhere around there.
Well, no, it would have been in October of 1900. He won that victory.
Okay.
So he was 25 at the time. And he wasn't fucking around either because literally, like, right around that time, he then writes a book called Ian Hamilton's March. So Ian Hamilton, I guess, was either commanding officer, general, something like that. And it was during like an engagement or a campaign. I can't remember what war it was. It might have actually been during like the South Africa Wars, the Boer Wars or whatever. But he writes a book and it's so successful. Like he sent on like a lecture tour that sent him to the United States. And this is where he actually meets Mark Twain, President McKinley, and Teddy Roosevelt. So that's where they actually met. He was on like a lecture for a book tour.
I guess you just see him so much as like the political figure in World War II that it's tough to realize like he was that popular as a writer that he was just on a book tour that was worldwide.
Yes. Here's the thing is so crazy to me personally about Churchill. There's this 4 to 5 year stretch that overshadows everything else in his career so much that people are shocked to learn about the other aspects of his career other than this like 4 to 5 year stretch during World War II. Fun fact, when he went to Africa, there is a listing of the amount of alcohol he brought with him on one of them. 36 bottles of wine, 18 bottles of scotch, 6 bottles of brandy. And it was kind of around, it might have been a little bit after this time, is when he establishes his very well-known drinking regiment during the day.
He was probably there for a week if he only had that much, right?
That was, I don't know if it was as heavy yet. I think this might have been in his early days when he went to Africa and didn't have that drinking regiment set up yet.
For everything else that he did in his life, he was a great man and a legend, somebody that we haven't really seen like a second of as far as like...
We have not seen his like since.
Yeah, but when you just strictly boil it down to his drinking, he might be one of the greatest of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And
he lived till 90. He was literally a functional alcoholic, but at no point did anybody ever say that he seemed impaired or question like that his poor decision making might have been a result of the alcohol. It was so weird that he was so operable, and everyone knew it was like a well-kept secret.
No.
But like he was still so capable that it never called into question his ability to lead. That's nuts. Because nowadays, like, no, that would be fucking ridiculous.
We saw it happen, how much of a raging drunk Nixon was.
Yes.
And how lucky we were that there were other people that surrounded him not to make the decisions.
And kept his fucking hand off the button.
Yeah.
Waited till he sobered up to make fucking decisions.
And for as great of a man as he is, you'll hear historians or people that were writing books about him and be like, oh, no, he wasn't an alcoholic. There's no fucking way he wasn't an alcoholic.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in a
The
negative
timing
term.
of his drinks throughout the day was spaced almost strategically to where he never had to really lose his buzz.
Yeah, he was
anything.
always keeping a little bit of something in the tank. And to go along with that, he was a historical cigar smoker, too.
Yes.
The man would light up in the morning. He'd just be smoking a cigar in bed. We'll talk about Winston Churchill Day.
Yeah.
How cool is that to just wake up and roll over and just light a stogie and you're sitting there reading the paper? You have an English breakfast laid out in front of you, just sitting on a platter, and you're just puffing away. You got your brandy in one hand. You're about to dive into some beans for breakfast. It's a hell of a way to live.
So his political career starts in 1900. in 1904, he joined as a member of the Conservative Party, but in 1904, he crossed the floor, is what they call it, to the Liberal Party. And I think, here's the thing, he kind of, for the majority of his career, he served as a member of the Conservative Party. He took power as a prime minister as a member of the Conservative Party, right? Okay. But like we were saying, he was kind of fluid into like how he saw the how he kind of saw the tides flowing on like certain topics. He had a kind of tendency or a reputation of being someone who would go across what they consider or what we consider the aisle and actually like strike up like relationships like about stuff. So he had some.
In other words, you're saying that he was a good politician.
Yes, yes.
He wasn't
a traditional politician. He was what you want your politician to be, like to be able to go ahead and see stuff from different viewpoints.
And he really, as far as that goes, he sees so much of kind of his belief system is so solid, which not to say that he wouldn't change thoughts on issues or different things like that, but he would recognize like, okay, the Conservative Party is getting a little bit off the rails on something that I believe in. Mm-hmm. I'm going to back out. We're going to take some time away. I'm just going to walk across the aisle.
I want to say it had something to do with, and this is kind of a reoccurring theme up until they gained independence, but it's like Ireland self-governance or something like that. He didn't agree with what the Conservatives had as far as their viewpoints on it. So he went across to the. I don't know what the specifics are of it.
I think it was that. I think it was part of like trade agreements and different things. And he, for as successful as he was, he had some major political blunders in his life.
Yeah.
But he just kind of stayed with what he knew and did the Liberal Party thing from 1904 to 1924, which is something that would be unheard of today. You would never be able to switch parties and probably win re-election the next time out. It doesn't happen anymore.
Let alone switch back later.
Yeah, and then just be like, I've had enough of this liberal stuff. The Conservatives are sort of back more into the center of the Venn diagram.
I think that you don't even hear that in this day. That's why he was kind of an outlier, and that's why the knock on him was he kind of was wishy-washy on which side he was going to be. So he was even not looked upon kindly this time.
He referred to himself as like a double turncoat or something like
something
that.
Like that.
Something funny. Like he even kind of enjoyed the funness of it, I think.
And I mean, he keeps getting like different appointments too. So like in 1908, he's appointed the president of the trade or the board of trade at 33 years old, the youngest cabinet member since 1866. In February of 1910, so 2 years later, when he's 35, he's promoted to Home Secretary. 35 years old, promoted to Home Secretary. That's the person that's the person that has control over the police and prison services. And at 35 years old, he starts implementing prison reform to separate war criminals from political prisoners.
That seems smart.
Yep. Try them differently like violent criminals from political prisoners. He also wanted to give them access to like libraries and stuff like that so they could better themselves while they were incarcerated. He had a lot of like really positive, like really forward thinking ideas.
Yeah, I just looking at him politically, he got shit done. Like you weren't trying to run out the clock. His idea of being a political figure was sort of to make sure that he got reelected because he was doing things, not because he was saying things. And the reform that you were talking about with prison or anything like that, it was all to benefit the people and to try to not necessarily keep the faith in the political system, but to show that they were actually making strides and doing different things. And he runs afoul a little bit later, kind of before he takes power as the prime minister for the first time with the gold standard debacle, which we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. But he always kind of has the best interest of the people at heart, whereas we just don't really see that anymore.
Well, he supported women's suffrage, so basically a woman's right to vote.
I had no idea that was something outside of America. Yes. I don't know why I was so America-centric about that idea.
You assumed it was so truly American?
Yeah, like I just
specifically American. We would be the only ones that would not allow like women the right to vote, right? No, not us.
No idea that was something that was an ideology outside of America, but it makes total sense. Like I get it now.
Well, you get where it probably came from.
Yeah,
The ideas
yeah.
of it came from now makes more sense.
There was a lot of justification to not let women vote in America because they couldn't vote other places.
Yeah, but not letting him truly off the hook on that one because he would only back the bill if it had majority support. So he had to know which way it was already going to go through.
Watching the wind blow.
Yeah, if he had to argue for it, he's like, nah, not me. I'm good. Hey, if you all are for it, I'm good. Like, you all want pizza, I'll get pizza. Pizza sounds good, but you guys don't want pizza, I'm not going to argue for pizza.
Pizza doesn't get a vote.
He keeps working his way, like, very quickly. So at 36 in October, or sorry, when he's 36 years old, in October of 1911, he's appointed the First Lord of the Admiralty. That is the dude that's in charge of the entire Navy.
I'm glad you explained it because I have no idea. There's terms and words that they use.
Okay.
I don't
This is so
understand.
fucking nuts to think of it in this context. So he's like 36, 37 years old. He is being put in charge of not only just like the Navy of Great Britain, the naval power in Great Britain, that is their bread and butter.
Well,
because
they're
they're
an
an island.
Yeah.
I know. But like, you think back of what like British naval explorers, it was always ships and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
As it's become like a war type thing, that's been the thing too. That's the only reason why Great Britain, aside from the RAF, during the Battle of Britain, was able to go ahead and, stand toe to toe with Germany for a while, is because they were able to control like the English Channel and a lot of the area like in the Atlantic there. So to put a 37-year-old in charge of that is fucking crazy. So he created at that point, this was 1911. He's also like, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on it, but he's also been like a student of history. And I think that came from him like doing so much reading and studying and everything.
Definitely.
That he kind of could see the writing on the wall with certain regimes that were getting ready to take power. So he started paying attention like over the next 2 years of him being appointed the Lord of the Admiralty. He creates a naval war staff, which apparently you don't create a war staff like
During
unless
peacetime?
Exactly, unless you're preparing for war, you're already at war. He focused on naval prep for the next 2 years and was really paying close attention to Germany's naval production at that point as well. And in 1912, German naval law, there was a law that was signed to increase their ship production. So Churchill was basically like, fine, every one battleship you build, I'm going to build 2.
Smart. It's staying ahead of the curve. I think part of what I kind of saw that leads me to believe that he really saw the writing on the wall with Germany was
The first time.
was he had been in these areas of Africa covering these different wars, and he saw like I think they were the Caliphate back then, the Muslim kind of fanaticism that went along with the religion, and he kind of saw the religious fanaticism, and he started to see the same thing popping up, not in religion anymore, but in political parties and ideologies, to where he knew like, okay, these people that were down there bombing for God or bombing for Allah or whoever it was, that's not just specific to religion. That can be applied to really anything in life.
Like political extremist groups or anything, or like fringe extremist groups, things like that.
He saw religious extremism, and he knew that wasn't just going to stay in the religious sphere. That was going to jump ship and go into politics.
I'm not quite sure. When we actually look in and do an episode like on World War One, like specifically and everything, I'm sure there were things leading up to it, because essentially World War One was, yes, fought the Axis powers, or the bad guys you would consider would have been Germany, the Ottoman Empire, which Germany was a part of, and then they were aligned with who? It was the Ottomans. Was it the Italians? No, the Turks.
I think
The
it
Ottomans,
was
the
the Turks,
Turks.
because I feel like one of the starting points of World War One was Archduke Franz Ferdinand getting assassinated, right?
Yeah.
And that was a major political shift that was occurring kind of in that Ottoman area.
So it was like the Austro-Hungary Empire, and I think that was like the Ottoman Empire. Germany and Austria, Hungary. Yeah.
Which another thing that is kind of odd to talk about today, because we just know these places where they are. But these empires that we see back then, like the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarians and all that kind of stuff, the reason that we have such a fucked up Middle East now is because, was it after World War One that
Two.
after World War
That's
II.
where like Iraq and Iran and everything gets divvied up.
Yeah, they were just drawing arbitrary lines between these countries, or between these swaths of land, and turning them into countries. But there was no thought of like, okay, the Kurds live in this region, so we should probably keep them all within the same country.
Yeah.
They were just drawing lines willy-nilly wherever they wanted.
They said when it came to the end of World War II, basically how they divided it up is, were you there in that theater during the last year of the war? So like the areas that the Russians were in during the last year of the war, that automatically became part of, Russia and the Soviet Union. That's where you get all the division now between like, when they broke up the Soviet Union, like Yugoslavia and like Slovakia and all those places got broken up and apart from the Soviet Union. Yeah, those were all previously places that were claimed, that were lands that could have been different countries even before World War II when they got claimed and overtaken by the Germans. It's so weird to think about that like there were new countries formed like less than 100 years ago over in Europe.
Yeah, the Middle East was kind of like just one big large area.
Yeah.
And there weren't really lines drawn towards like Afghanistan, Iraq. I think Iran was sort of part of that. And it was just an area that was up for grabs, and it wasn't like up for grabs recently. Like this is an area that's been fought over for 1,000+ years. So in order to draw those lines, it was such a political thing. And he stayed in politics. That was the other weird thing, was like you're talking about, he became the secretary of the Navy.
The Lord of the Admiralty.
Lord of the Admiral.
Top Navy dog.
Yeah, at such a young age. 1915 rolls around, we start World War I. He goes and re-enlists in the army again.
Well, there was something that happened before that. So it starts in 1914 actually. So Churchill's overseeing the naval effort and Britain's aerial defense during that time. It was, I think he went and joined the army. Was it after Gallipoli?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is one big knock on Churchill that
I forgot. Yeah.
that people would use against him in like Parliament and everything like that. So basically, it would be like if the comparison. Oh shit! In the Civil War we were talking about, it was Robert E. Lee. So basically, if Robert E. Lee had any time after Gettysburg had brilliant strategy or suggested a campaign or something, everybody would always be like, hey, so remember Gettysburg? So that would always be like their chip to counter him. Gallipoli becomes that for Winston Churchill. So basically, during this campaign, Gallipoli is through like the Aegean Sea. It's a way to access like the Baltic region or something like that. It goes between like Turkey or something like that. It was where they were trying to control like access to like oil and everything. So it was being held in World War One by like the Ottoman Turks or something like that. And being the Admiralty or lead First Lord of the Admiralty, he basically sets up this campaign, the Gallipoli campaign, because he's trying to, in a roundabout way, relieve pressure and have them draw troops out of France, Germans, and so then the French and the English can advance where they're like stalled in the trenches. So all this activity is going to happen down in like the Mediterranean. That's going to cause like a movement of German troops to have to be pulled from northern France. And the way it's described, like it was like a beach landing and all this kind of stuff, but the like opposition's like defenses were like way stronger. It ended up taking a lot longer than it needed to, and it ended up being a failure. There were like 50,000 casualties with 250,000 soldiers incapacitated from fighting. So I mean, it was like
That's a big fuck up.
It was a big fuck up, and I want to say that according to him, there were leaks within. He was Lord of the Admiralty. He took responsibility for stuff, but he would have an argument that secrecy was of like the utmost for this operation, and there were leaks from somehow like within like army divisions down there. Not leaks, but they showed their hands too early to show them that they were coming into this area, and so that was like his excuse for it. But one thing about Churchill is that kind of helps him to get back is he always does take the fault for his mistakes. So he takes his lumps.
That he just always seems to learn from it.
Yeah.
Like, there's always at least something that he pulls out of every failure.
He pays. He pays for this. He gets removed. So this raises such an issue that literally within a month, I think, they have like whatever they discuss in the House of Commons, there's so much pressure from the opposing side that they have to remove him. The like leading party removes him from being the First Lord of the Admiralty. And then that's when he rejoins the army and he goes back into combat in northern France.
And I'm sure at that point in time, because that was during his liberal years, that the conservative party that he had left probably wasn't too keen on keeping him in power still.
They were probably looking for a reason to get him out of there if you're really thinking about it.
And he gave him a great one. But yeah, there was definitely added political pressure to the...
But like, you just stopped being essentially the head of the Navy, of like the most powerful Navy currently at the time in the world. And your first instinct is to be like, so I'm just going to hand me a rifle, I'm going to fight.
Going back in.
Yeah.
I just, it's so crazy to me that that's his pivot and that's his move, is to go from maybe wearing a wig, maybe wearing a powdered wig while he was in Parliament to, like you say, just going out and signing back up, be like, yeah, give me old blue, give me my old rifle back, we're back to it.
What you were saying about him like learning so much from all of his experiences and going into things with the specific goal of gaining experience. So he goes back into the army. He serves a little bit of time for the army. And then in 1917, so literally within 2 years, he's made the Minister of Munitions. And basically the Minister of Munitions job is within, Parliament and everything. They're the one that makes sure that the war output for bullets and bombs and shells and everything for the country can match what the war's output is. So his job was he'd gone and got that experience on the front line or whatever. He actually came back too, and he made it like standard issue for all soldiers to receive steel helmets, because apparently he got hit in the head while he was down there, and like a piece of shrapnel almost like killed him by hitting him in the head.
What would they just would have been leather helmets back then?
I don't know if it was standard issue. I think maybe like higher ranking officers, got the steel helmets.
The more important brains got more protection.
Exactly. And maybe the other helmets were made of like a less durable, but he ended up standardizing like steel helmets. But and that was like a quick thing that he did. But that kind of shows you just like, okay, I went and served this. Something almost killed me by hitting me in the head. I noticed that this is what saved me. None of my other guys have this. Let's get this going.
Yeah, we got to get this fixed. Because if we don't get this fixed, we're just going to fail. And like you were talking about with the output of ships, as far as trying to keep ahead of the Germans, rolling him into that Minister of Artillery or whatever it was.
Minister of Munitions.
Yeah.
Same thing.
He took the same kind of approach with that he did with the same shipbuilding. He wanted to make sure that he stayed ahead of everything because he knew the benefit that would cause on the battlefield.
Well, and then, so 2 years of doing that, then another 2 years later, so in 1919 to 1921, he's made Secretary of State for War and Air. And so he's heavily involved in World War One. From like, not, what am I trying to say? Not an administrative position, but from like a position of command structure, but he also has actual like experience like on the ground too. That's got to be pretty rare.
Yeah, well, and maybe this is just my lack of reading up on it, but these positions are positions that are given through the military, not through politics, right?
They have to, it's like the First Lord of the Admiralty. You have to almost have approval to put them in these positions. Or
it's like voting on cabinet positions.
Yeah, or you can send them to these positions, but here's the thing. Like cabinet positions, your credibility is based upon the people you're putting into these positions. So like, yeah, that party could put anybody in these positions, but if those people fail horribly, it's a knock against that party. And then the other opposing party, like when they kicked him out of the First Lord of the Admiralty, can put enough pressure on you to make those changes. So I think they're appointed by the governing party, but I think that they can be overturned, and they have to be smart moves. You have to be successful at those. Well, and your party will not be in control the next go around.
Yeah. His new positions that he's getting may be being given by people that had more of a empathetic view of the decision that he made with Tripoli. Gallipoli, yeah.
I don't...
Maybe they saw it as, hey, he was more justified in what the shit that he took for it.
He took the full brunt of it for that operation. Like, he did. There was when they always do like the commissions, like the Warren Commission for certain acts, they had a commission that was filed to find out essentially what caused this. Because, I mean, it was a huge fuck up.
Yeah.
Come to find out, he wasn't the one that was solely responsible for it, so it dispersed blame. But then it came back at that point that because he took all the blame for it, it actually made him appear in a more positive light, that he would be accountable for stuff.
He was willing to jump on the grenade.
And just before, like, I know you have 1924, just before we get to him even moving higher up the chain, he writes a 6-volume series on World War One. A huge fucking series of books. And then he writes a 4-volume series on the Duke of Marlborough, the first one, that are like acclaimed.
Not his grandfather, the actual first Duke?
The actual first Duke. And during this time, I think it was maybe around 24 to 29 when he becomes the Chancellor of the Exchange. I don't even know how to pronounce that.
Executor, I think is the word.
Yeah. There's this issue about India's self-governance, and it ends up passing that they should be able to govern themselves to a degree, and he ends up voting against that. So that just, again, kind of goes where he still has some of the same beliefs in regards to that. Do you mind if we take a bathroom break real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, while we take a break from class and take care of some business, you can also take care of some business.
If you don't follow us on Instagram or Twitter already, our Instagram handle is Historically High Pod. That's Historically High POD. And our Twitter is Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right, and back to our show.
All right, and we are back. We're getting into the meat, the deep, meaty tissue of fucking Winston's career.
Yeah, for as crazy as everything that we've said, this guy's already been in multiple wars. He was a fucking prisoner of war and then escaped and then had this whole, what could be considered a career in
He's had 2
politics.
careers. He's had a military career and a political career.
And
up to this
technically
point.
3 because he's writing these books and going on book tours.
And a literary career. Yes.
Yeah, he's just everywhere.
Well, so 1924 to 29, he becomes the Chancellor of the, how do you pronounce it? Executor. That is literally the second most powerful position below the Prime Minister in Parliament, because he's in charge essentially of the economy. Mm-hmm. So like he's just gaining, he has all of the, this is where like he's so well-rounded from his skill set. He's now in charge of the economy.
Well.
He knows about running, well, hold on. He did run it for 5 years until fucking up what you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
What I mean though is that's why I think what made him such, what is, I can only describe as the guy for what's going to come, is because he has experience with everything.
Yeah, and he has that can-do attitude. Like, these aren't just positions of name for him. He's actually going.
He's stubborn as fuck, and not always in a good way.
No, he definitely. There are some things that he believes in strongly that don't pan out, and possibly the biggest one was, I think that this had something to do with coming out of World War One, being off of the gold standard. But he puts them back on the gold standard. And basically the gold standard, for anybody that doesn't know, in America, I think we fell off of it in the 70s or 80s. But if you take a $1 bill and you walk into a bank and you slap it down on the table and you say, I want this much in gold, they have to give you back the exact same amount in gold. Like, every banknote that we have is backed by the gold standard, so you can just turn any amount of money into gold and vice versa.
But how much gold? The same amount as the dollar weighs?
The same amount as the value of it is. So, say gold's $1,000 an ounce, and you walk in and hand them $100, they have to give you 1/10 of an ounce of gold back.
Okay.
And when they go into it, it just completely tanks the worth of their dollar. And anybody, just because
pound
gold
sterling, right? Is that what they were using at the time? Pound sterling?
could be.
I thought that's what it
I
was.
think that they still use the British pound. I don't think that they're on the euro system.
I thought they were. We're going to have to look at that.
Yeah, we'll check that out. But it just completely craters their economy. Their money is so much more devalued now that they went back onto it, because I'm sure over wartime, when you are producing, creating so many, there's a reason that the military-industrial complex is a thing. And it's because during wartime, you ramp up all these different
Industries.
Yeah. And so you're making more money, so in turn your money is worth more. Well, bringing them back to the gold standard dropped the value of their money, when you have an economy that's based on a certain value of your currency and then you go to something less, it just immediately ruins everything. And it did.
So he's kind of removed from that role too, as well, right?
Yeah.
After that, so I think the opposing side probably raised enough of a protest and everything that they had to remove him there.
I think it was generally everybody agreed that this was a bad offense. I always enjoy this term when people just go into the wilderness.
Yeah, the wilderness years.
The wilderness years is that you go out to find yourself? Like, did he travel around in the early version? I guess not the VW van.
I think maybe that's kind of, they call your wilderness years because that's just when you're not doing really anything of substance or note.
Yeah, you're just out there kind of wandering. It's sort of like your wanderlust.
Yeah.
Like you're traveling around, and luckily he had still had the literary career that he did. So he was traveling to America, and this time he was doing tours. He was speaking.
He was still a member of Parliament.
Oh, was he?
He was still a member because that's one of the big things about him. So, okay, so his Parliament career was, I think, 62 years.
Yeah, he was.
It was 1900 to 1964. He only had a 2-year gap where he was not in Parliament. So you can be a minor member of Parliament, not like a senior member of the party, and still essentially have your wilderness years of when you're not like super active or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, the early 30s, that's when he began sounding the alarm against Hitler. And kind of going back to like the student of history thing, he kind of knew what to look for. And he wasn't always right. I'm not saying he's always right, but he had this knack for being able to kind of foresee someone who was going to be a problem. So like he starts sounding the alarm. Not a lot of people are listening. They believe that after the Treaty of Versailles, which was meant to prevent the buildup of Germany's war industry and like ability to make war, people didn't believe that they would be in another conflict like that so quickly. Like the kids that were born during like the First World War would be coming of age just old enough to start fighting in the second one. Like no one foresaw that. The first one was so horrible. The only reason that the first one isn't looked at as horrible as it was is because the second one was even more horrible.
And it came so fast.
And it came so fucking fast. So I don't think it was a combination of people not wanting to even entertain the thought of another world war occurring.
Well, we called World War I the Great War.
Yes.
So this was something that on the magnitude that nobody had ever seen before. And if you think that that's a once-in-a-lifetime event...
You're not planning on the greater war
no,
after
yeah,
that.
When you call something the Great War, you're not planning on it being trumped by something, 20 years later?
Well, going back to his viewpoint on India, don't completely quote me on this, but I believe one of his arguments about providing India their own self-governance is he had this weird thing about because there were different cultures within India that they would begin infighting and kind of destroy themselves and kind of get caught into that.
There would be a war for independence just like there is everywhere else there's a hierarchy.
Yeah, something like that. And because he had these weird, like, I don't know if they were outdated or just kind of looked down upon beliefs, when he started trying to raise the alarm on Germany, that kind of lessened his credibility. You know, if someone has a really unpopular opinion, you're less likely to listen to the other opinions that they're going to provide, even if those make complete sense. It's kind of what the situation was here. It's because a lot of people the majority felt he was wrong on India. They also felt that he might not be exactly correct on like Hitler in Germany.
This sort of a Bernie Sanders type situation.
Exactly. In 36, Henry VIII becomes the new monarch. He ends up abdicating. I didn't know this, but he ends up abdicating the throne like really quickly, and his younger brother George VI takes rule. And because of this happening in England, this happened over the course of like an entire year of trying to figure this whole thing out with like the secession of the monarchy. That also provided this huge distraction from Hitler and the Nazis and what they were doing too. Because, of course, Parliament's going to probably be in like a tizzy over like the monarchy and all that kind of stuff. Any focus drawing away from that is going to be too much focus drawn away from what Germany's doing at this point.
Yeah, it wasn't just England. France was over there. We just signed this gigantic treaty because we just had a world war where there were so many different continents that took part in all this. And we just don't have the oversight of Germany to just let this shit happen. And to the point to where by the time I think people started getting on board, and I think when Germany started taking land and advancing, everybody was just caught by surprise except for Churchill. Churchill knew this was coming.
So kind of during Churchill's wilderness years and when he's not like super active, Neville Chamberlain becomes the prime minister. And he basically has like a policy of appeasement for Germany. That's kind of, the Nazi regime. At this point, Hitler's become chancellor of Germany, and they've adopted essentially a one-party system. So guess what?
1933, I believe.
Was it 30? I thought it might have been a little bit. That's when I think maybe the Nazis became a recognized political party. We're gonna have to cover that when we get into like the rise of that party. But so basically, Chamberlain has this thing where he's not enforcing the Treaty of Versailles. He's not forcing anything. He's not like calling up France and being like, "Hey, like what the fuck are these guys doing? We see that they're rearming and they're building stuff and materials for war." Germany's just like, no, we're just building stuff so we can defend ourselves. It's cool. And he's like, "Oh, okay, is that it?" And then at some point, like during this time, Churchill's also his most vocal critic for Chamberlain and this policy of appeasement. In 1938, Austria is forced to join Germany. So they threaten Austria, and they're just like, "Hey, we're just going to take you over, or you can just join us. You used to be part of our country anyway." And so they take that. In the fall of 38, Germany demands Czechoslovakia. And Churchill, after this demand is made, Churchill goes directly to Chamberlain. I think he goes like after hours to his actual personal residence to have a talk with him. And he's like, "Don't do this shit." He's like, "You cannot give in. You don't give them an inch. You give them an inch, they're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing." Chamberlain, within like I think a week to 2 weeks, actually flies down to meet with Hitler and signs the Munich Agreement, and basically gave this requested land, like in or what would later become Czechoslovakia, this land to Hitler in Germany if the Nazis promised that they're not going to make any more land claims. And they're like, "Okay, we're not going to do any more land claims." And Chamberlain is like, "Great, I can tell everyone we're good." But he's already at this point had to give up these lands that, weren't Germany, a few weeks before.
Yeah. Well, and not only is Germany popping off, but Mussolini and Italy are kind of on the same pathway. Mussolini is...
There's like a big government shakeup down there with the fascists or something like that. Or Mussolini's been in power for quite a bit.
He was the senior member of the Axis. He was in power, I believe it was 10 years prior to Hitler taking power in Germany.
Okay.
And so you already see that regime. I'm not sure as far as geographically how close Italy and Germany are. But Mussolini's making some noise. He's starting to threaten Greece. He's starting to try to spread his wings a little bit down in that area. And that, I believe Chamberlain had sort of like an appeasement treaty with them as well.
There was something when Churchill first becomes the prime minister, and we'll get to that in a second, where there's this big push that Mussolini has offered to act as an intermediary once they're actually like at war, to basically negotiate like a settlement or something. So there's this weird like still interaction between certain members of the parliament and then like members of like Italian, whatever their version of their government would be. It doesn't take very long. So that Munich Agreement, that's fall 38. March of 39, so literally about 3 months later, Germany violates the agreement and takes Poland.
Oh, how about that?
Or they have plans to take Poland. They basically tell Poland, "Hey, we're going to, invade you." So Winston Churchill is proven correct about Hitler this entire time. And then on the 1st of September of 39, Germany invades Poland. And then 2 days later, Britain and France declare war.
Very quickly, we went from trying to appease and trying to satiate Hitler and Mussolini, and this is before Japan really starts popping off, which I found interesting. Churchill's stance on Japan, but we're talking a matter of 19. When did World War I end?
It was 4 years, so it started. I just had
1915.
No, I actually think it might have ended in 1915. So World War I starts, 1914. 1919, I think, is when it would end.
So from 1919 to 1939, we're talking about a matter of 20 years before we have a war declaration from England and France back onto Germany again. That's, in the span of time, that's very quickly.
Well, as soon as they declare war, guess who gets called up to be First Lord of the Admiralty again? Old Winnie.
Bring him back.
Bring him back. Run it back again, baby. He knows what he's doing. You know, we're going to go ahead and look over. In the meantime, you've kind of been a little bit of the responsibility off that Gallipoli thing has been taken off your back. So I think we'll give you another crack at this. And they go into this thing called, did you read about the phony war? So like there was this time after Britain and France had declared war against Germany where like not a lot was happening. Like everyone was trying to like feel each other out and see what the next moves would be. And so Britain thought that there was something to do with like Norway because there's so much coastal area there that they would have places to go and manufacture ships, bring in supplies, all that kind of stuff. So there was this like time period of, it might have been even like 2 years or something where there wasn't really a lot of action done. Like Germany was still building up its production and getting ready to do certain things. And then England really wasn't making any moves. I think they had sent at that point, like the British Expeditionary Force, which was like 350,000 people into France to establish positions or to take certain areas.
Probably
reinforce
to
them.
try to, just play the defense at that point.
So there was a plan to defend Norway. Well, what ends up happening in spring of 1940 is the Nazis invade Denmark and then take over Norway. And at this point, because there had been such a focus on that, of trying to defend Norway, because they kind of knew what was going to happen and everything, there was a big call for Chamberlain to resign. Because he still gets to call the majority of the shots and everything.
And his appeasement deals have fucked up. All the agreements trying to satiate Germany has proved that that's just not possible.
Yeah. And so he resigns on the 9th of May in 1940, and on the 10th of May, that's when Churchill is made prime minister. And he was really the only guy that they could get into this role that had enough loyalty from both sides of both parties to be agreed upon, to be the prime minister within this time. I don't really think his resume needed to go ahead and do anything else here. I mean, he had been a wartime commander during World War I. He has served in so many various roles that he knows the ins and outs of a lot of different areas. And he was he was basically one of the sole people that was like, Hitler's bad. What the fuck are we doing here?
Yeah, for my understanding, he was brought in as like a wartime prime minister because him and Neville had their kind of ups and downs about appeasement and that type of thing. But he actually kept Neville as a part of like his parliamentary prime minister cabinet, and Neville was more of like he handled the stuff at home. Like he was dealing more with the people while Winston was focused solely basically on the war.
Yeah, he created a multi-party war cabinet. So he had like
5 people,
Yeah, and he had people from each of the political like parties in there. So every party felt like they kind of had a voice or had information on what was going on, which was enormous because that helped galvanize him essentially as being the leader. It made everyone feel like they had a common goal.
They all had a voice in what was going on.
The same day that he gets elected prime minister, Germany invades Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands.
Bad luck.
Yeah, not good.
Couldn't have done it a day earlier or a day later. And that their advancement, it's tough to realize how fast Germany advanced on some of these places. And granted, it's because...
That's why they called it a blitzkrieg, man. Lightning war.
They didn't have a standing military, anything like that, and I think some of these places probably. So it was fairly easy to take them over. But yeah, like you say, the blitzkrieg.
I think more of it was that it was a combination of, even if they had a prepared military or a standing military, you still have to be able to gather them in a location. They may be standing, but they're spread out throughout different areas in your country. That's the big thing with the French. Is in World War II, the French got overrun so quickly is because the German, that whole blitzkrieg thing.
Hairball.
I just swallowed my lifesaver.
Don't choke on your lifesaver.
No, it was small enough, thank God. That, France is huge. And while they were invading just across like the Maginot Line, the border of Germany and France, they still had huge sections of their soldiers down in like the south of France to help protect them against like Mussolini if anything happened down there. And so they were able to capture a huge swath of France before the French military was even able to mobilize. And at that point, if they've captured certain key territories and everything, they're not going to, even once you get your troops there, they're not going to do much good.
They're just going to be late to the party.
The whole point, though, is that all of this, there had to be lead up to all of this. So it's not like Germany just like all of a sudden like tanks and shit just exploded out of the ground. Like, they were making all this for a long time. They were having planes made. So a lot of this Treaty of Versailles stuff, they were able to get away with because they were designing planes that they were like, no, they're passenger planes. Like, look, these are, but they were so easy to be configured and modified into bombers. They only had to switch around like a fuselage, and all of a sudden, this wasn't a passenger plane anymore. It was a high-level bomber or something. They were developing, they had sport flying clubs.
Yeah.
Where
Because
people
they
would
weren't
go out
allowed to have a military
Yep.
to be, or an air force to be able to train.
So they were training fighter pilots through these sport training clubs. So these fighter pilots had years of experience doing all this stuff. Not maybe so much actual, combat experience, but they were able to go ahead and be excellent pilots by the time they actually launched this, this conquest. But I mean, early on, Churchill did not have it easy, especially when the Germans pushed in through France so easily that basically all 350,000 soldiers of the British Expeditionary Force were pinned against the ocean at this place called Dunkirk on the coast of France. And it's basically like, if you're looking at a map between France and England, it's not the closest area, but I mean, it's still reachable by boat and everything. It's on that side of the coast. And they had soldiers did you read any about Dunkirk?
No, I wanted to hear you explain it.
They also controlled Calais, which was I don't know exactly, it might have been like 20, 30, 40, 50 miles down the coast, but like further east down the coast, so closer to Britain. And
It was a landing point on D-Day, wasn't it?
it was one that they had kind of kicked around with the idea because it had deep water ports, but it was too heavily defended by the Germans. But they had a garrison of like 5,000 British soldiers at Calais, and then 350,000 in Dunkirk that were stranded, not enough boats getting them out. So Churchill and his cabinet basically had to come up with the decision of telling the commanding officer at Calais, you need to go ahead and provoke the German forces and get them to focus on you for as much time as possible to give us a chance to try to evacuate or figure out a plan for these 350. Like, your 5,000 is going to try to buy time for this 350,000.
And that's not a quick exit strategy with 350,000
No.
soldiers.
And I'm not sure who was the mastermind behind it. Of course, Churchill gets some, credit because he's the one that approved the plan, and it even sounded a little crazy, is that instead of to get these soldiers off, he basically put out a call to every single vessel in Britain, luxury yachts, pleasure crafts, anything over, I want to say 50 feet. He put in a call for people to go to Dunkirk and to pick up soldiers.
Hell yeah.
And they called them the little boats of Dunkirk. And so over the course of, 3 days, there were enough boats that it got like 320,000 plus soldiers from Dunkirk back to England.
Huh.
Now, that was the entire British military at that point. Had they lost that, they would have had no bargaining chips to defend against invasion either.
Well, that's... I can't imagine just to come into power as a prime minister. I don't know if that was like a goal for his entire life, was to get into that position. But
it was. He made some weird comment when he was a kid.
He was destined to lead
during like the hardest time or something like that. Yeah.
He had made some sort of premonition that was what he had been given. But his first years as prime minister, he watched a country who probably didn't have the same might as England fall to the Germans. He watched France give up.
France was supposed to have the strongest standing military of any country in Europe. And that's why it was such a shock when they ended up surrendering. Is he's like, you guys have like the longest, or you guys have the largest military, and you just got spanked.
Maybe you can shed some light on it, because I had heard about it, but not a whole lot. There was a point in time when, after France had either fallen or they were in the process of falling, that Winston told the leader of France, he's like, hey, your guys' Navy fleet is still out there. Go ahead and bring them to Britain, and we will use them to strengthen our Navy, and we will be able to fight against the Germans. If you leave them there, the Germans are going to be able to take those boats, and they'll be able to use them in their Navy. And Churchill assigned a bombing raid.
Yeah. So basically, what happened is when France surrendered to Germany, you had this area of southern France that was still under control. Have you ever heard of the Vichy French?
Yeah, that
Okay.
yeah, okay.
So the Navy was in the control of the Vichy French, and it was parked in it was parked in it would be a Middle Eastern port at this point. I can't remember which country. That's where it was stationed. And the Germans came to an agreement that they would keep fighting against the Vichy French, but that the Vichy French couldn't help or do anything like that. So they're not like, hey, we're going to just give you the Navy or anything like that. But they told Churchill, they're like, no, we can't send the ships here because that'll be violating the terms that we just made with the Germans, and we can't, then they'll just conquer all of France.
Yeah.
They were going to plan on doing that anyway. They were just not creating active war against the Vichy French. They're like, we're still going to rule you, but we're just not going to try to come kill you.
That's the thing that I don't fucking understand is why is everybody trying to give Germany the benefit of a doubt after seeing all this, after seeing the Blitzkrieg and everything else? Why the fuck are you just like, hey, we decided that we pounded out
You're trying not to get your civilians killed.
disagree? I get that, but you have to know that it's just a matter of time. Just like
And if you don't
Churchill knew.
Yeah, and if you don't have the strength to even fight against them, long story short, what Churchill ended up doing was he was like, sorry, old boy, but he's like, well, if you aren't going to give us those ships, we definitely can't have the Germans getting those ships. So yeah, he sent a bombing raid. No, he sent in ships, I think.
Was it?
It was a fleet. And they ended up engaging with the French fleet, and I think it ended up killing like 1,300 French sailors.
I thought it was more than that. I thought it was like multiple thousands.
I saw the number. It might have injured a lot more than
Yeah.
that, but I saw like 1,300 actual like deaths or casualties.
Well, and then the Germans used that to their advantage because the Germans tried to start spreading propaganda within the Vichy saying, hey, they attacked you guys. So are we really the bad people in this situation?
Exactly.
Which is great PR for the Germans, but it was really the Vichy leaders.
It's just denying the spoils of war. It's like you can look at it and be like, yeah, but you guys also like could have just called your soldiers off the boats and been like, yeah, you guys destroyed him. Hey, we didn't help them destroy him or anything like that, but there could have been something there. They actually even fired on each other. So it was like the Vichy French were firing on the British ships too.
Wow.
So, but I mean, at this point, like Churchill and England are standing alone. Like he's reached out for aid to the United States. So FDR knew we were going to have to go to war. He was even in favor for us going to war, but the American opinion, because of World War I just being so close, was that this is a European problem. This is not a problem for us to intervene in again. And so he couldn't even get to the point where he was providing aid or anything like that yet to England. So literally Churchill has his Navy and has the Royal Air Force and is basically the only thing kind of standing between, freedom in Europe and total Third Reich domination.
Well, and Churchill had this weird belief that Japan would never be a player. Like, he didn't think that they were going to join the Axis. Is that sort of what it was? He didn't think that they would ever be a threat in the Second World War.
I don't know if it ever really occurred to him. I don't know if I'm sure he was aware of what was going on there and like also like the disputes between, America and for the oil embargoes and shit like that. He probably had a general idea because they did have like in Singapore, I think Singapore was British stronghold.
British.
Yeah. So he obviously had some knowledge of what was going on, but I don't think that was his focal point. At that point, I think he was trying to figure out what's happening at home, and then he would figure that out. Because I know they also did have some ships down in that area and everything. The Blitz, basically the bombing of London and the British Home Isles.
Battle of Britain.
Yep. That was between like 40 and 41. And that was during 40 that's when he gives his like 3 big speeches and everything. Like, we will fight in the air, we will fight on the beaches, in the land and all that. We'll never surrender. He gives 3 of those types of speeches in 1940. And pretty much, and public opinion in Britain was also like this as well. It wasn't like he was going against the will of the people. It was almost like the other people in Parliament that were really pushing for him during this time to enter into like negotiations with Hitler and basically more appeasement and all this kind of stuff. Like, how do you not realize the ramifications of that? Like, they're going to tell you that you have to disarm
Yeah.
and everything. And then what's to stop them after you're disarmed from coming in and conquering your way? They have the rest of, the European peninsula.
You're just sitting ducks.
Exactly. And for some reason, Churchill had people within his own cabinet saying that they should, negotiate for peace terms with Hitler. At this point, he was like, nah, we're not going to do that. So he really galvanized the opinion also of like the British people with these speeches that, surrender was not an option, that they were all that was standing between, the free world and darkness and everything. So gets, through the Blitz.
Well, God damn, that was a deep one. But to talk about the Blitz a little bit, I think I told you I had no idea really how the Battle of Britain played out. And, excuse me, the Blitz sort of started because the Germans tried to basically just overrun the RAF. They tried to completely shut them down and shut them out. So it was more of like a battle between the RAF and the Luftwaffe.
It was basically the Battle of Britain was all a lead up to establish, in order for Germany, which had taken over France and, was ready and reinforcing itself along the Atlantic Wall, for them to invade the British Home Isles, they had to establish superiority over the Channel. They first had to control the Channel, then they had to control the skies. And so until they controlled those two, what would end up happening is if they tried to launch an invasion, all the British would have to do is basically just fly bombers and bring the Navy into the Channel. It's a short little strait and everything, and just be able to pick them off. So the Blitz was to basically, it served twofold. One, it was to try to draw out the RAF and their fighter aircraft, and basically just through attrition and all these missions. Because when you're bringing over bombers, you have fighters escorting them. Mm-hmm. Their jobs are to engage the other fighters who in turn are trying to shoot down the bombers. So through the war of attrition, they were basically trying to grind down both the morale by bombing England and also remove their ability to make air combat. You kind of mentioned this the other when we were texting the other day about like the overestimation and underestimation.
Yeah.
So Britain overestimated the Germans' ability to replace aircraft losses and manufacture aircraft. The Germans underestimated Britain's ability to create these aircraft because they weren't creating them. They had some aircraft factories, but during certain points of World War II, they were assembling like different components of the aircraft in these small like villages and towns and then shipping them to be assembled. And then instead of having huge airfields, they would have like these airfields of like 10 or 20 planes scattered over a huge region. So regardless of where the Germans were coming in to do their bombing runs, there were planes close by to like meet up and try to meet them head on and take them out before they were able to get into like populated areas.
So it was just sort of like under the cover or under the veil of space that they were creating these planes that Germany didn't know about.
Yeah, the other thing too is, so Germany in the beginning had the better air force. They had more training because they had helped fight in the Spanish Civil War. Mm-hmm. So, but what they didn't really, and when they were flying over, fighting with the French Air Force and everything, if they lost a plane and a pilot had to bail out, chances are he would be able to bail out over friendly German occupied area, or find his way back to the German lines.
Yeah.
If you're fighting over the Channel or you're fighting over Britain and you get shot down,
water or
you're behind enemy lines. So they might have been able to meet the demand for aircraft, but for experienced pilots, they were losing on that front too.
And they lost in the Channel too, didn't they? Because they didn't have a massive naval fleet of like carriers to drop off soldiers.
Yeah, they were having to try to like piecemeal together like giant like barges to try to pull them across and everything like that. Like with Germany has where it would like manufacture its battleships would be like in Germany on like the Rhine River, and then it would have to send the battleships up the river just to then get into like the North Atlantic and everything. And then they would have to make, like, after they had conquered France, they would have to make these things called the Channel Dash, where they would have to send these warships to try to like send them really quick through the narrow gap in the English Channel to like a friendly French port. German friendly, or send them up to like Norway or something like that. So it's not like they have this huge coastal area to begin building barges and landing craft.
Yeah, they're just running the risk through the channel of not being bombed.
Yeah, and after the Battle of Britain, so it was called Operation Sea Lion, was supposed to be the invasion of the British Islands. And I think as soon as the Battle of Britain ended and everything, they had to end up calling that off because they figured there's not a way that we can establish air superiority over Britain in the Channel.
Well, and that's where I think Churchill, I'm not really a believer in premonition, but this makes me more of a believer, was after they had tried to take out the military might to do it that way, then Hitler and the Third Reich just immediately were like, okay, we can't take them out militarily. We're going to try to grind down these people. And these bombing raids that started happening after there was like the open air combat and the sea combat were just specifically targeting basically like factories so they could try to knock out their powers of production. But it was just like neighborhoods. Like they were just bombing these people. And for those people that were in Britain at the time that were just being bombed and blown up and just torn to shit, for them to still have the belief in Churchill to be like, hey, we need to keep fighting. Churchill had to be the guy to give those speeches to get those people to have enough resolve to be like, I understand that my whole housing area just got blown up and I didn't die.
Can you imagine like the terror of like night bombing? You're just sitting there sleeping and all of a sudden you just hear the...
You're never sleeping ever because you're just always trying to anticipate trying to get away from that.
You go outside and all you see is spotlights and you see the anti-aircraft fire going up, but then you can hear like the buzz of the planes above you and you're just like, so am I just running and the bomb's going to end up landing on... Like, that's got to be just fucking terrifying. But to keep like the morale of your like people up during that and being like, I know this is horrible, but we cannot give in. Like, if you think this is bad, like... living under these people would be even worse.
This is what we're doing while we're at war. Imagine what happens when they take total control.
Yeah.
It just completely blows me away. And some of his speeches that he gave were just so... After the Battle of Britain happened, I think he was over in Canada when he gave the Some Chicken speech. And basically, after he criticized the French for giving up and basically letting Germany take them over, the German chancellor or whatever it was said something like, just wait, in a month's time, Britain will die the death of like a chicken being choked or some shit like that. And after the Battle of Britain was over, Churchill was over in Canada and he gives a speech, Some Chicken, and he stands up and his first line is, Some chicken, huh? And then he goes, didn't get our necks wrung like we thought we did or something like that. And it was just like a direct shot at the French minister or whoever said that. It was like, bro, you guys gave up. We withheld bombings of our entire cities.
I mean, there's something to say too, like France being like landlocked, connected with Germany, everything like that. But still, like, you had the largest army at that point. And then you did like nothing in preparation for this. Like, you're the ones closer, so you should have known what they were doing even more so than us.
This falls squarely on your shoulders because you guys share a border. Like, you need to have some sort of periphery around your country.
Like, especially because you're going to be the first ones fucking taken over.
Yeah.
Like, why aren't you on higher alert?
Like you say, you're the first line of defense, which means that you're the first line that's going to get fucked if you can't defend that. You need to be in charge of everything and be watching over them very closely. It just weren't.
March 41, that's when the Lend-Lease Act comes in. So this is what was signed between America and Britain before we were actually in the war. Again, this is March 41. So the Lend-Lease Act was an agreement we signed with Britain that allowed the United States to remain neutral in the war, but to provide food, fuel, and war materials to Britain. So not really being neutral. We're sending them everything basically to fight. And this is when we start the Nazi U-boat wolf packs come in because we're sending just these huge shipping convoys over there.
And is this, it was, when did you say in 41?
That was March 41.
So how close to Pearl Harbor was that?
Well, that was December 41.
Okay, so this was prior to we started.
Yeah, we didn't come in, so this will be March is the third month. So 9 months away, we're going to be in this.
Okay.
In the summer of 41, so apparently Hitler had enough trying to take over Great Britain. So in the summer of 41, that's when he decides it's time to fucking launch the invasion of the Soviet Union or Russia. So that's when he opens up his Eastern Front and starts doing that, which we all know how that turned out. December in 41, big year 41. Pearl Harbor happens, and
before Pearl Harbor, something, just not to cut you off, August 41, Churchill and Roosevelt signed what's known as the Atlantic Charter, and the Atlantic Charter laid down the blueprints for the United Nations.
okay.
So Churchill even had that effect of not just like during the war.
Had the foresight of saying we need something in place after this thing's over.
Yeah.
Because there was something, what was it? It was the League of Nations.
I think it was.
That was
before,
established
yes.
after World War One. He's like, this league did fucking nothing. He's like, we need to set the groundwork for something that's going to be effective. He already had plans at that point. He's like, I'm setting us up to win the war. This is going to be our plan after we win this thing.
We're not seeing World War III.
Yeah.
We're making sure that there's something in the way that's an impediment to it.
Yeah.
So just like his fingerprint still, World War II, huge fingerprint over, but something that we still see today that's still working was enacted because he had the foresight to be like, we can't keep doing this. Like, these wars aren't good for anybody.
So summer 41, Nazis invade Russia. December in 41 is when Pearl Harbor occurs, and that's what forces America into World War II. Man, I don't think anything else could have made him happier. I'm sure he wishes it was a smaller event that didn't, cripple our Navy for a little while in the Pacific and everything. But the fact that at that point I'm trying to remember what he said. He said, like, as soon as like America came in, it was like the beginning of the end or something like that for the Axis.
I think not that he was happy that it was the size of the atrocity that it was, but had it been something lesser, like had they only killed like 100 sailors or whatever, or 100 military members, I don't know if that would have been enough provocation to enter the war. I think there had to have been a certain number of loss that happened that made it necessary for them, or made it necessary for us to enter the war. So like, I'm sure when he got that call, he probably knew, just because him and Roosevelt had so many other meetings, that Roosevelt was in for it.
Yeah, he knew about it before he called Roosevelt.
Yeah.
He called Roosevelt and he's like, is it true? And he's like, yeah, it's true. He's like, all right. He's somehow convinced too, like during some of their first meetings when they were figuring out how to approach the entire situation, now that the entire world was literally like in this, is he did a great job. And I think it probably might have been a combination between him and Stalin, which they had a fucking weird ass relationship and everything.
Yeah, dude, very weird. Stalin's one of the weirdest guys in history.
Yes. They were able to essentially convince Roosevelt, be like, listen, Germany has got to be the focal point here. And Roosevelt was on board. He's like, yep, let's go ahead and take care of Europe first, and then we'll figure out what to do about Japan. But even at that point, because I think Roosevelt was talking to him and he's like, well, how are you guys doing down in the Pacific? He's like, Singapore will never fall. And then something ended up happening in which that didn't look good on Roosevelt. Is Singapore was British held. It was heavily defended, and they were so prepared for like a naval bombardment, and it couldn't be like invaded from the sea. Well, they didn't anticipate that the Japanese army could cross this like narrow land bridge. They didn't think any army could cross it. Well, they ended up doing it and attacking Singapore from like another direction, and it was just a fucking blowout. They said it was actually Singapore. The loss of Singapore might be the greatest like blunder in like British like history for like combat history or something like that.
Do you think when Roosevelt agreed, like, hey, Germany's got to be the focal point and then we'll take care of Japan, that Roosevelt already knew, he's like, we got something for these Japanese people. Don't you worry. We're creating a bomb. Hey, I'm not going to bore you with the details yet, but I got this guy named John Oppenheimer. I got something for Japan coming. Like, let's focus on Germany. We'll wipe out Japan later.
I think Japan being so far from the United States, we have our entire, like, for them to make war, for them to make war on the continental United States was a long way away at that point. So I think that was probably helped to make it be like a focal point and everything.
With Japan, we don't have to fuck with an air force or a military. All we have to focus on is the Navy, because there's such a distance.
And they would still have to bring the Navy all the way this way, and we can build, all that kind of stuff. speaking of, Hiroshima and Nagasaki and everything. So FDR, that's his thing. Or no, who ended up calling for that? That was Truman. Yes, it was Truman that called for that. The development of it was under FDR, though. Churchill kind of had his own version of that with Dresden. And the bombing of Dresden.
Oh, Dresden. Yeah.
Dresden. Yeah, sorry. So there was a couple different, like with bomber planes, they had these things called bomber theory, and they would be like the, pinpoint bombing or blanket area bombing, like these thoughts about how they should go about it. Well, like different ones, like pinpoint bombing isn't effective because you're missing your target because you're trying to hit these. You don't get as much damage. The success rate's lower. Blanket bombing, you're going to have more success because you're launching more bombs over a larger area, but you're going to kill civilians.
You're fishing with dynamite.
Exactly. It's these different schools of thought and then everything in between. So Churchill, at a certain point in the war, was like a proponent of like blanket bombing. At that point, like you've seen your own country get bombed a shit ton and everything. You're literally fighting against an enemy that's caused how much death and destruction up at this point. There was a city called Dresden, and they bombed it with incendiaries. So like instead of just being like bombs that are going to destroy things, incendiaries are going to destroy it, plus they're going to catch everything on fire. So
they firebombed the city.
They firebombed the city of Dresden. And like the initial reports were that it could be like up to like 80,000 civilians were killed and everything like that. They've come back and said, I'm not making an excuse for the numbers because it's terror bombing and everything is basically what it was. But they ended up coming back.
It was during a war.
It is, but here's the thing too. Like looking at everything, would you want that done against your cities?
No.
So that's kind of what I'm saying is it's questionable, but at the same time, this was also at a time when like we didn't know a lot about Germany's atrocities and everything like that.
Yeah.
So in comparison, Dresden is just against Churchill. In comparison to what he's done, it's the most extreme thing that he's probably done.
Well, and quote me if I'm wrong, because I really might be. Wasn't Dresden one of the towns that Hitler like assured them that they would never be bombed? Because there were towns that
there were certain towns that got called off because of like their cultural or their historical significance, and I think Dresden was one of those.
And so they just assured them that they would never be bombed. But then Churchill doing that kind of flew in the face of the promise that Hitler made for his people.
Yeah, because they bombed London too, and London's a heavy civilian population.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it was just Churchill being like, we can get fucking dirty too if we have to, but still in the grand scope of wanting to be like the winners and try to keep your hands as clean as possible and win the war in the most noble way, it doesn't look good in that. That's a tactic that your enemy would use, that you would expect your enemy to use, I think is the biggest knock on it.
I guess I just look at it differently.
Like you're saying, man, though, like it's war at that point. Like it's the whole rationale behind using the atomic bomb. How many is this event going to be the contributing factor that ends the war? Are they going to be like, this is bad, we surrender? That's what I mean. Like the whole rationale with the atomic bombs was we can do this and show them that we can inflict this amount of damage, because we could have bombed, I think they said like 5 to 6 more cities in Japan. And at that point, we would have had the estimated casualties of an invasion of Japan.
Okay, so that means that I owe you an apology. Because during the atomic bomb episode, I was the opposite way of saying, hey, maybe this was a little bit overkill, and you were the one that was justifying what I just tried to do with the bombing in Dresden. You're correct? The atomic bomb wasn't too much?
I'm saying, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, like, we don't really know. Like, it's all a matter of circumstance. Like, what if they wouldn't have given up and it would have taken us? How many cities would we have bombed before they finally gave up? Would it have to be 3 more than the projection of the amount of casualties had we invaded Japan? Because then we're talking about something completely different. So it's one of those things. Here's the thing. The reason why it looks as bad as it does is because we were the good guys in World War II. We weren't supposed to do bad guy shit. But sometimes in order to do that, to win the war, you do have to do...
You got to get in the mud.
You do have to get in the mud. And so, but if that's one of the bigger knocks against Churchill, he's still got enough stuff that he did that's not going to overshadow anything.
Yeah, I'm not hanging anything on him because desperate times call for desperate measures, and when you're living through the Blitz, there's going to be a lot of ideas that sound good to you.
Churchill visited Normandy a couple days after D-Day.
How crazy is that? He said that he wanted to be there before he actually visited. He said he wanted to be there the day of.
Did you hear the fucking king said he was going to do that? I don't know if the king meant it, but he did it to prove a point to Churchill.
He's just like, I don't want you to be there before I'm there.
No. So Churchill was like, I'm going to be with the first wave in one of the landing craft when we land on this beach. And people are like, no, you're not. You're fucking crazy. And so he went in, him and the king had weekly meetings.
I love that. They had lunch like every Thursday.
Yeah, and Churchill would drink during their fucking lunches.
Of course he would. He would drink during every meal. He would drink during breakfast.
Yeah, but during one of the conversations, the king was like, as a beacon to my people, I think that I need to be on one of the landing craft in the first one as a symbol to the people that I'm fighting for them. And he's like, sir, he's like, that's ridiculous. He's like, you don't think anyone would actually let you do that? And then he just kind of looked at him. He's like, and next to me, you're the second most important person. Do you really see anybody letting you do that?
Oh, because he said something like you were the head member of the 5-person war cabinet.
Yeah, and so he basically proved a point. He's like, yeah, do you see how stupid you sound when you're saying something like this? Like, you're going to go. He's like, actually, I'm probably more physically capable of storming the beach than you are.
Well, and so much like the Civil War with Lincoln going and sitting at Jefferson Davis's desk.
Yeah.
You see him wanting to be there to be like, D-Day, I had my reservations about it. It wasn't something that I really fully agreed to, but it's going to fucking work, and I want to be on the first ship over there. Like, he wanted to show that power to lead from the front, and I'm sure most of that was just how much time that he spent in the military that he had desires to be back into it because he clearly enjoyed it. So he wanted to be out there.
I wonder if I know that he wanted to inspire and be out there and everything, but I wonder if he had a little bit of an invulnerability complex.
Yeah.
Like if he hadn't been wounded up to this point or really seriously hurt, he was drinking like he does and it wasn't knocking him out of commission or any type of thing like that. I don't know if he just thought
alcohol couldn't even affect it.
Yeah, I don't know if he just kind of had a little bit of a thought that he was a little bit invulnerable. Like some of the stuff he said makes me kind of think like he had that air about him.
He was just the king of invincibility.
Yeah. And I mean, during World War II, him and Stalin and Roosevelt meet at all these different conferences, like at Tehran and
how does that work? How are you just at war? I guess Stalin being on our side, but there were so many things, and he was even kind of at the forefront of this. And I'm sure it's because he met Stalin a lot. Because after the war was over, he's like, yo, next issue, USSR.
It wasn't like a resting period. And I think that might have led to him not getting that re-election.
Okay.
Right after.
Yeah. So
he had met Stalin enough during their conferences and everything to know that after this got taken care of, I mean, it was a marriage of convenience, like the enemy of my enemy type 100%. Deal. It wasn't like hey Joe, AA. No, like America and Britain, that was a mutually benefit. Like Russia was just something like, I'll deal with you later, but I need your help for now. And so during their meetings, him and Stalin, they kept the allies together and everything like that and kept the peace. But yeah, that entire time you could just see the wheels working with Churchill because as soon as World War II ended and everything, his focus went straight to combating communism.
Well, and it makes so much sense that you would say that that's why he has that kind of cooling period between his PM runs is he was, like you say, he was the one that focused on the next enemy because he was looking for the next person that he had to fight off, whereas everybody else was trying to be like, let's chill out for a second.
The way that he thinks about it, though, makes complete sense. So in post-World War II, Germany ends up surrendering, a week after Hitler shoots himself? Escaped.
Because this was the other cool thing. Where was it? May 7th, 1945. He was actually the one that got on the airwaves and broadcast the surrender.
He
of
talked to
Germany.
people on the airwaves. He gave speeches on the airwaves all the time.
Yeah, so like he wanted to be the one to give the people the good news. He was the one that was out there on the forefront giving these speeches to try to give them hope. He wanted to be the one to deliver the news of victory. And that's so cool, just and so deserving and so fitting.
He went and crossed the Rhine River in Germany in March 1945. Like, he wasn't like, I mean, he was far from the front line, but he would like go into like the zones that they had just, like, the Allies had just taken over. So he was definitely like wanting to be, I think he wanted to, ingratiate himself.
He wanted to be one of the boys again.
He did. He wanted to be eternally one of the boys. So post World War II, when you are Germany and you've taken over that much area, what you have at that point is France is like, no, we know where France is. We're keeping all of France. Germany has like certain areas taken from it that they had conquered. And then I think we were talking about this earlier. There was this weird like rule that wherever you had been like for the last year of the campaign, that country was going to be under your influence. So Russia had pretty much pushed in everything like toward the west all the way up to Germany, and then like was fighting in like the Baltic area, and then even like were they down toward the Middle East?
I want to say Pakistan might have been.
But they still had a lot of influence in that whole area and everything. So you had all these countries that were now going to be under the influence of communism. So essentially, within the fell swoop of Germany being defeated, you then were making communism that much stronger because you were providing all these additional areas to a country that was their deal.
Yeah.
And then you had the other countries that were trying to be held on to by like the United States and Britain, not like from a sovereignty perspective, but to have their influence. So like Greece and Italy and all that kind of stuff, to keep all that stuff from gaining hold there.
Well, and you still had, even after the loss of World War II.
He was already in the Cold War.
Yeah.
World War II ends, and for Winston Churchill, the Cold War began right then.
Yeah, there was no lapse in timing or anything like that. He started building towards the Cold War kind of, I'm sure, when he was meeting with Stalin. Like, he knew. He knew that if they could get over the hump in World War II...
He was shaking his hand, making notes with the other about this guy.
Exactly, yes. Before we keep going, one more bathroom break. This one's running a little long, but it would be great. Stick with us.
All right, be back. All right, and we're back for the home stretch. This is the victory lap for Winston Churchill.
The real fun stuff.
So he ends up coming back in...
Was it 1951?
In 51. So the reason he doesn't get... You would think that like the guy that just led you literally through like the darkest time in your country's recent memory... shoe in for another, keep him in that position. Well, right after the war, apparently, and this makes sense, there was a movement within like British politics where there was a party that was gaining traction, and basically they implemented social services, welfare, like state-run healthcare, stuff like that. And because
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah. And because they were coming off a war when everyone had rationed and suffered and all that kind of stuff, it sounded so good that apparently that party that was in support of it, they ended up winning. So you have to be the major controlling party for the member to be the prime minister. That's the controlling party. So they gained enough power where they were able to then like appoint like their own prime minister. And so that's how Winston Churchill launched that. Crazy. Like, everyone just assumed he was going to be a shoo-in, but the people are like, we've just been at war for like 4 years. Some civil services or some social services sound pretty fucking good.
Well, and I think part of that too may have been not necessarily a Winston choice, because I'm sure he just would have preferred to stay in power, but he was kind of, like I talked about, he was a prime minister that was like a wartime prime minister.
Yeah.
And now that war was coming to an end and they needed to look back towards more of like a Neville Chamberlain, take care of the people type prime minister, he may have served his purpose to get them through the war. but he wasn't going to be able to serve the purpose to help people, which I disagree with because I think that he's done a lot of good things for the people previously to the war.
Well, and during that time, he also didn't. It's not like he got kicked out of politics. He was the leader of the opposing political party during that time too. So that was at the time when he was starting to. He gave his information. That's when he gave his like Iron Curtain speech about Stalin and like socialism and everything, or communism in Europe. So I mean, he was very active during that time frame. But then, yeah, in 51, he comes back around and essentially, despite like losing the popular vote to the Labor Party, the Conservatives won an overall majority, and they were able to go ahead and then install Winston Churchill as the prime minister again. So he had a second.
They took enough seats for power of parliament. It's to me, just doing quick math, 1951. So it's 51 years plus 26 years of him being born in 1874.
He's 77 when he takes office for the second time.
Yeah, which it will ultimately come to like his sort of age and state and not necessarily failing health, but his health issues as to why he doesn't run again.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
that math to me, I don't know. I know that Biden's old. I know that Trump's old, but they got to be older than this, right?
I think they're around that same age and everything.
Okay, so maybe it's not a leap to be like, we're
They're
seeing
also
in
not
politics that these people are being older
This guy
and older.
drinks so much though. So how many?
Yeah, he's
how many years
definitely
does that add on to his life?
been
Or,
rode
like,
hard and put away. Wait, but he made it to 90.
I know. So like 77, he takes office again. He'd have like minor strokes even up to this point. And they were just kind of thinking they're like, he'll probably serve due to his like declining health. Even like King George thought that he was going to stand down after like maybe a year or two.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so in June of 53, he suffered like a serious stroke and had like paralysis on one side. Still didn't back down. And
There was also, wasn't there a hierarchical change? Didn't the king die and then Elizabeth II took over?
I'm not sure. Let's see.
I thought it had happened kind of right in the middle of that.
There was something about him being knighted. So he was knighted as Sir Winston. Oh, in 53.
Yeah, so it was
knighted.
April 24th, 1953.
Yep.
He was knighted, became Sir Winston Churchill.
Yeah, it was widely expected that he would retire after the Queen's coronation in June 53.
That's what it was.
But then, like, literally, it didn't retire him. It just caused him to have a stroke. It's like the Queen.
He was so shocked.
God. He was fucking paralyzed him on one side. But seriously, he ended up like almost making like a full recovery by like November, and then he ended up. But that was, and then he retired as prime minister in April of 55. So he stayed for 4 years.
It's a full term, I would assume.
Yeah.
Because if his ministry
Part of
was,
that term being paralyzed on half your body. But I mean, he ended up living until what,
65.
60,
So
until
he
65.
Had a decade after to be able to live the good life.
So the thing is that's when they saw after World War II the British Empire being disbanded, and apparently he didn't look too kindly upon that, just because he was probably old British, and everything. Not saying it should have been disbanded and everything like that, but for him, it was one of those things about, do you think he had thoughts about like, I fought for this, like I fought to maintain all this and everything, and now it's just kind of being like it's being returned back to the people who live there. God damn it.
There's a term that I heard that I thought was kind of fitting, and it sort of goes along the lines, it just sounds prettier than it was a different time, but ahistoric. Like instead of just historic, there's like ahistoric. So like ahistorically, he lived in a time where he had just given everything that he could to try to keep England in.
When you say ahistoric, you're supposed to put yourself into that mindset of what would have been socially acceptable and stuff back then.
Yeah. Which it had to have been, because like you say, he just literally put everything, he pushed all his chips into the middle of the table to try to beat Germany. And the fact that he did, now everybody's like, well, we need to start going our own separate ways. Like, no, I gave everything that I could to make sure this stayed this way.
So when he was knighted, the Queen actually offered him also the Duke of England, the title of Duke of England, which apparently is even way more prestigious than being knighted. It makes sense because you're the Duke of London.
Doesn't that make you
Duke of London? Did I say Duke of England?
Yeah.
offered him Duke of London. And
Doesn't
he
that
declined
make you like a member of the like royal family?
I don't think you can do that from a biological thing by offering someone a title. I think it has to be like full on biological.
Like she wanted to adopt him.
Which actually, when he ends up dying, only one other person has been provided this outside of the royal family. He is given a state funeral.
Really?
He is provided, when he dies, a state funeral. His body is interned at like Westminster or whatever for 3 days. And then he is finally laid to rest at Oxfordshire, like near his family estate of whatever I named it earlier and everything. But yeah, he received a full-on state funeral.
Damn.
Only one other, and it was another prime minister back in like 1899 or something like that, or 1899 was provided that.
I thought you were going to say it was John Lennon.
No. But yeah, that
James Bond.
So I mean, people definitely knew what he did for the country and everything like that. He also, did you know, won a Nobel Prize?
But he didn't win it for what you think that he would. He won it for literature, right?
Yeah.
So he didn't. He feel like he could have won the Nobel Peace Prize, maybe.
I don't know if peace was his thing. Remember, he
wasn't,
he wasn't too keen on. Well, he wasn't too keen on making peace with people he knew couldn't be trusted to keep the peace.
Yeah, but he created peace by defeating them.
Yeah, he won it for literature, and I think that's maybe what he would have preferred and everything, because he was alive when he won it. He just wasn't able to go and accept the actual award.
It was early on, wasn't it?
I thought it was in like 1963 maybe, and that's why he couldn't travel to do it.
Maybe.
But
okay.
It wasn't just for like his documentary series or like his like coverage, because he ended up writing another 6-part thing on World War II, like a super detailed and like really popularly received one. But he also, they said, as part of him receiving the Nobel Prize in Literature, it was part of also his speech writing and being an orator, which would make sense because speeches are written word and everything. But when you look at it from that perspective, yes, his speeches were legendary.
He is what I would say, probably without any sort of question, the ultimate most quotable person.
Yeah. If you know his quotes, this isn't like Anchorman quotes or anything like that. Do you want to do his quotes before we get into his regiments?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start off with my first one.
Okay.
If you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah, we wrote a goddamn country song about that. Didn't Jason Aldean write a country song about that?
Oh, there's that song. If you're going through
yeah,
hell,
that's what I'm saying.
I think that's Blake Shelton or some shit.
My first one is never hold discussions with the monkey when the organ grinder's in the room. Like, never try to strike a deal with somebody who's not in complete power.
Who's not in their own capabilities.
Yeah. Just a fucking, the weirdest thing that you could say, but it makes total sense. Like, it totally fits the idea of what Churchill was.
All I can say is that I've taken more out of alcohol than alcohol's taken out of me. I don't know if that one's true for him.
No, I think he won.
Yeah, actually, that's true. Yeah.
He battled through that. This one, I think, is probably the most poignant thing that he could have ever said that matters today. And I wish this was under our money instead of In God We Trust. But the price of greatness is responsibility. Mm-hmm. Like, is that not the biggest allegory for this country of people being like, hey, we deserve these rights? And it's like, no, you're fucking responsible for those rights. There's rules that we have set in place that you have to follow to be a good citizen in order to be great. And if we're the greatest country in the world, we got to fucking take some responsibility for what we have.
You have enemies? Good. That means you've stood up for something in your life.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. This one is by far and away my favorite, just because it's so, I don't know, it just hits home with me. Never stand when you can sit down, never sit down when you can lie down. Like, this dude,
work smarter, not harder.
Yeah. And he totally, over living his life with all the shit that he did, he was one of those guys where he kept a schedule that we'll talk about.
Oh, yeah.
But he was just one of those dudes where, like, he had to steal every bit of rest that he could because he was doing so much shit that he wanted to make sure
his hours and work ways were so unorthodox and everything. courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. It's also what it takes to sit down and listen. And I think that's very applicable today, is that people forget about that second part.
Yeah, it's okay to know that you're not the one that has all the answers, that you can listen to something that makes more sense.
And do you have any more?
No.
I have two more. We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. I saw that literally on a billboard. It was like coincidence out the ass. Literally within the last week, driving out of downtown,
Yeah.
I look up to the left, and there's a Winston Churchill quote, and it's that quote.
Huh.
It's, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give.
That's interesting.
I know. Timing's perfect.
I was under the assumption, too, that Jimmy V was the guy that made the quote of never give up, never, never give up. Mm-hmm. That was Winston.
Yeah. And this last one, I'm prepared to meet my maker. Whether my maker is prepared for the great ordeal of meeting me is another matter. I love that one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the infamous Winston Churchill schedule.
That's where we get Winston Churchill Day from. It's
Ate the same breakfast every morning.
Yeah, a traditional English spread.
Well, not traditional. In some regards, not traditional.
Yeah, it was fried.
Well, no, his drink of choice during breakfast was not traditional English.
Okay.
So he would wake up and spend like the first 2 hours, and he would wake up like 7, I think.
I got you. I got the full rundown of it.
Okay, go ahead.
So 7:30 in the morning, wake up, remain in bed, eat breakfast, read newspapers, work, glass of whiskey and soda. 7:30 in the morning, he's banging out breakfast and a whiskey and soda while he's reading newspapers. 7:30 in the morning. Next check-in, 11 a.m.
Yeah, they said he stayed in bed for up to 2 hours in the morning, eating, doing his drinking, and catching up on all the papers.
That was
Guys
just
got to stay up to date. No more comfortable place to do that than in bed.
yeah. Why are you standing? Why are you sitting in a chair?
But he would have like his person that like took his dictions come in as soon as he would just be in his nightgown, sitting in bed eating, and just be talking and having them take down stuff and taking his correspondence and all that stuff. So he was working.
Yeah.
He just knew how he worked best.
He knew how to work from home very, very well. So 11. So we're talking 2.5 hours later. He was out of bed. He would take a stroll around the garden to supervise his estate while drinking whiskey and sodas. 1,300 hours, so 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Multi-course lunch. He would have an imperial pint of champagne.
Or wine.
How a pint of wine's a lot of wine.
That's
not just a glass.
That's a lot of wine.
When you're following that, when you're washing down whiskey and soda from 7:30 in the morning to wine till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're having yourself a day.
Oh, and did you miss the part about the cigars during breakfast too?
Oh,
I
yeah.
know you touched on that.
Yeah, he would just sit in bed, just in his white linen sheets, and just puff away.
So, just so if people don't know what a full English breakfast is, it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It includes, when they're like, hey, do you want bacon, sausage, or whatever? No. With an English breakfast, you don't have to choose. It is sausage, bacon, eggs, toast, and perhaps some leftover steak from dinner the night before. And then he would enjoy that, his drink and cigars.
He would have them fry it. Mm-hmm. So he would have them fry everything that they could. Beans are also a part of that.
This man lived to 90.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe he holds the key to everything.
Maybe, what's the guy from Rolling Stones? Keith Richards. Maybe Keith Richards is somehow shares the genetic bloodline of Winston Churchill, and that's just genetic predisposition to just put up with shit.
Everything that you can.
All right, so after lunch.
After lunch at 1, 15:30, so that would be 3:30 in the afternoon, I believe. Work study with a glass of cognac in his hand. I'm sure it wasn't just a glass. I'm sure there were many glasses. 1,700 hours, 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
He would have an hour and a half nap or a siesta.
He had to have his nap, man. And when people asked, why do you... First of all, weird ass time to take a nap. That's evening, close to bedtime. But the thing is he worked late. And so I don't know if it was the king that asked him. He's like, I've heard your work habits are kind of unusual. And they're talking about times when they can meet. And he's like, well, what about 5 o'clock? And he's like, I like to have a nap at 5 o'clock. He's like, why? He's like, well, I find that it reinvigorates me for my work in the evenings. It's like, I like to work quite late,
And yeah, he burned the candle at both ends. So after his siesta, 18:30, what is that? That's 6:30. Wake up, bath, and dress for dinner. So he didn't even pop into the bath to get ready until 6:30 at night.
At least he was bathing.
Yeah, that's true.
Good bathing habits.
2,000 hours, so we're looking at 10. He would have a lengthy dinner at 10 with guests and an imperial pint of champagne again.
And then followed sometimes by 1 to 2 brandies after. They were just dessert drinks.
No. And you would think 10 o'clock dinner, that's got to be a pretty big ordeal with as much champagne and or dessert drinks that he had. Midnight, work and study for more cognac. And then from 1 to 3 o'clock in the morning would be bedtime. So you can understand working from 3 and getting up at 7:30 in the morning every day. The guy needs to slip in a siesta.
He's got to have a nap. Get tired. But he was, he was never actively out of Parliament, actually, until even after he wasn't Prime Minister anymore. He kind of stayed around Parliament just a little bit longer. He ended up serving...
He needed to scratch the itch.
Yeah, 62 years. He became, at some point, they call him the father of Parliament or the father of the House, and it's the longest standing member of tenure with them, or in that position. So, yeah, he was in it all the way up until the end. And then finally, I don't know, we touched on this, he died in 65, but it was actually due to another stroke. And then 2 weeks after that is when he passed. But I mean... Talk about people say Winston Churchill. They remember that 4 years during World War II, which they should. He, such an impact during that time frame. But I mean, the life that this guy lived.
It was a full 90 years.
Oh yeah,
he lived multiple lifetimes just within that one. Just everything that he did, literarily. Don't know if that's a word. Politically, and then just during war times is crazy.
I can honestly say that if someone else would have been in that role, I mean, if they would have been like Winston Churchill, maybe we get kind of the same result. But there's very few moments in history where you need a specific person in a specific role at a specific time and all the stars align. And him being in this role, it's not, I don't take it lightly in saying this or say this without really meaning it. I feel like we're looking at a much different world. If he's not the person in that world, if Britain falls, and here's the thing is people are like, well, even if Britain would have fallen, we still could have beat Germany. Where are we going to set up shop at? You have to have a place. That's the whole point was because he was able to hold out at that point, he kept Britain open for us to use as a forward staging area to send all of our troops where they could be on land and then send them in for an invasion.
He was kind of our plug.
Mm-hmm. All right, man. You got anything else?
Great
man.
No, just a great man who I think gets his due, but I think he, deserves due for more than just that stretch of World War II.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening again, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.